Good evening, dear listener. I'm glad you're here. Perhaps you've been carrying the weight of the day, and now you're ready to set it down. Tonight, we'll travel back across centuries to walk quietly with families who once lived under the snowy eaves of the Swiss mountains. The world remembers them as the Amish, though in their earliest years, they were simply neighbors and kin, struggling to keep faith alive in a cold and uncertain time. If you find comfort in these slow journeys through history, I'd be grateful if you tapped the little heart of approval, what people now call a like, and perhaps subscribed so you won't miss the next quiet story. And if you wish, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. A porch in Ohio, a kitchen in Maine, maybe even a small town far overseas. I love imagining these stories drifting like lanterns into so many corners of the night. For now, ease yourself into stillness. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Maybe crack a window, let the night air stir the curtains, or sit close to a quiet fan, the steady rhythm masking the day's distractions. Picture yourself by a fire, its glow steady, its warmth patient. Let your shoulders settle, let your breath slow. And now, with the embers soft before us, we begin with the faintest stir of longing, the kind that can move a whole life forward without anyone else ever noticing. A hidden hope stirs softly before the day begins. It begins in the half-light, long before sunrise, when the farmhouse is still wrapped in silence and the windows are rimmed with frost. A boy, no more than 14, lies awake, eyes open to the rafters above, listening to the quiet breath of his younger siblings. Around him, the straw mattress crackles faintly when he shifts, though he scarcely dares to move. The air is sharp, cold enough that each breath forms a thin cloud. Yet what keeps him awake is not the cold, but a wish so small it might be mistaken for a passing thought. He wishes for peace, not just the quiet that comes after chores are done, or the hush of a winter night, but a deeper peace, one that would let his family live without fear of soldiers on horseback cresting the hill. It is the kind of longing that cannot be spoken aloud at the table. His father's face, weathered and resolute, carries enough burdens. His mother's hands, cracked and raw from winter work, cannot hold another worry. So the boy keeps his wish tucked inside, where only he can feel it, like a stone warming slowly in the palm. The rooster outside has not yet stirred. The world beyond the wooden walls is black as ink. And yet the boy senses the hour, close to 4, perhaps a little later. Life here demands such knowing. To rise too late means to lose precious daylight, and in winter daylight is short. He turns his head, sees the dim outline of his father sitting upright on the far side of the room. A low whisper comes across the space. Time to rise for the Lord's work. There is gentleness in the words, but no room for delay. The boy lets out a breath, reluctant to leave the warmth pressed between siblings, but obedient. His bare feet meet the icy wood. The shock wakes him more than any bell. He hisses softly through his teeth, then stands. Outside, snow presses heavy against the house, muting every sound. At the water bucket by the door, a thin layer of ice has formed overnight. He breaks it with his fist, the crack echoing like a muffled snap. The water that splashes onto his face stings, but he mutters a prayer with it, half habit, half plea. Thank you, Lord, for this new day. It is the first of many prayers he will offer before darkness returns. His mother, already by the hearth, coaxes a stubborn fire to life. Sparks leap, wood shifts, and slowly, a flame takes hold. Her hands, split at the knuckles, move with quiet skill. No creams, no salves, only lard rubbed with herbs to keep the cracks from bleeding. The cow sounds restless, she murmurs, voice flat with fatigue. Might be her time. The boy nods. Outside, the cold will be worse than inside. He pulls on wool trousers and a homespun shirt, garments worn thin by seasons of labor. He owns only this set and one for worship. That is enough. The door opens with a groan, and the night meets him full on, snow knee-deep, air so sharp it cuts into lungs. Stars scatter thick above, so bright they cast shadows across the drifts. For a moment, he forgets his tiredness. The sky feels endless, a river of light pouring silently over the earth. Each step to the barn burns his cheeks with wind. His fingers stiffen, his ears sting. He counts the paces, 30, always 30, until the door looms. Inside, animal breath warms the air, though only barely. The cow lies on her side, heaving. Labor has begun, and with it, the day has changed. Whatever tasks had been planned will be swept aside. Here, new life must be coaxed into the world, or else survival falters. He strokes the cow's flank, murmuring, "Easy, girl, easy." He knows what is at stake. Without her, the family loses milk, butter, cheese, the staples that see them through winter. Already, his father joins him, rolling sleeves to the elbow, hands steady, though lined with age. "We'll see her through," he says. And so, the hidden wish within the boy, the longing for peace, shifts slightly. It is still there, still glowing, but now it weaves with the urgency of the moment. If life here is to be endured, peace will never mean ease. It will mean steady hands in the dark, courage in the cold, and faith that carries through trial. Outside, the settlement sleeps. Inside the barn, father and son bend to the work of saving a cow and the calf she carries. Both lives balanced on the thin line between loss and endurance. The boy feels fear tighten in his chest, but his father's calm steadies him. The wish remains, quiet but firm. Peace. Someday, somehow, enough peace to let children sleep without worry. Quiet breath gathers as the morning prepares to rise. The barn door closed softly behind them, leaving the cow to her slow work of labor, watched now by the steady eye of the father. The boy returned toward the house, boots heavy with clinging snow. Above him, the stars had shifted, paling slightly with the promise of dawn. The air was sharp, but there was a silence in it too, the kind that settles over valleys just before the first light lifts. It is in such moments that one becomes aware of every sound, the creak of wood underfoot, the whisper of wind against the eaves, the faint stir of animals tucked close in their stalls. Inside the house, warmth had begun to grow from the fire his mother had coaxed alive. The glow lit the small room unevenly, casting long shadows along the rough-hewn beams. His younger sisters were waking now, their faces pale and round, hair tousled from restless sleep. They rubbed their eyes with fists still small, shivering as they pulled woolen stockings higher. The boy's heart softened at the sight. Childhood here was brief. Play gave way quickly to chores. Yet in these first moments of waking, they were only children, blinking against the cold. On the table, a simple pot of oats simmered slowly, bubbles rising as steam curled into the room. The smell was plain, but reassuring. Food here was not taken for granted. It was the measure of survival, and every bowl of porridge meant another day held secure. His mother ladled it carefully into wooden bowls, each smoothed by years of hands. She added nothing sweet today. Honey was for feast days, or for times when spirits needed lifting. Today, there was only the steady sustenance of oats and water. The boy sat, spoon in hand, and let the warmth spread from the bowl into his chilled fingers. Around him, the family moved with quiet rhythm. His 12-year-old sister mended a grain sack with thread and needle, her stitches steady despite the cold that numbed her hands. Beside the fire, the littlest one hummed softly, distracted by the shadows flickering on the wall. Outside, wolves had been heard again the night before, their howls carried on the wind. Everyone remembered the stories, sheep lost, even a child taken some winters past. Yet for now, in the dim kitchen light, there was a fragile sense of safety. His father stepped in from the barn, the smell of straw and cold air clinging to him. He nodded, a grave gesture, and accepted the bowl offered by his wife. "She is holding steady," he said, meaning the cow. The words carried more weight than they seemed. A living cow meant milk for the table, butter for trade, security against hunger. The boy exhaled slowly, a knot loosening in his chest. The family bowed heads for prayer. The father's voice, deep and even, filled the room. He gave thanks for warmth, for food, for breath itself. He asked strength for the labor of the day and protection from the watchful eyes of those who would call their faith a crime. His words were not lofty, but simple, shaped by years of repetition, yet never dull. The boy closed his eyes, letting the cadence sink into him. Outside, the eastern sky softened from black to deep blue, then to gray. Smoke rose from chimneys of neighboring farms, faint columns against the still air. The settlement was small, 12 families bound not only by faith, but by necessity. Each had a craft, one skilled with iron, another with wheat, still another with livestock. Together, they formed a circle of survival, each hand supporting the others. In these frozen valleys, no one endured alone. The boy finished his porridge and set the bowl aside, rising to pull on his coat once more. Already there were eggs to gather, wood to split, water to draw. Every task was both chore and devotion. To milk a cow was to thank God for nourishment. To chop wood was to honor the trees provided. To mend cloth was to remember the sheep's gift of wool. Faith was not a Sunday affair. It was sewn into each gesture, each breath. As he stepped outside again, the first blush of sunlight touched the snow, scattering across its surface like spilled gold. For a moment, the world looked softened, almost merciful. Yet danger still pressed at the edges of that beauty. The boy remembered what Jacob, the elder's son, had whispered only yesterday. Soldiers had been seen on the road, searching. Worship in their dialect, their manner, was forbidden. Arrest could come at any moment, as it had for neighbors before. But he pushed the thought aside as his boots sank into snow. The chickens clucked anxiously as he entered their small coop, feathers ruffling in the cold. He gathered the eggs carefully, laying them in a woven basket. Each shell was fragile, but together they formed a day's worth of meals. He smiled faintly at the smallest hen, the one his little sister had named, despite warnings not to grow attached. Even here, children reached for comfort in small acts of naming. By the time he returned, his sister had laid out freshly patched sacks, ready for grain storage. His mother moved steadily between tasks, her face drawn but composed. There was never rest for her hands. They cooked, mended, tended, comforted, often in silence. Yet she carried within her a resilience as strong as iron. The boy watched for a moment, spooning the last of the porridge into his mouth. He wondered what his mother wished for when she knelt in prayer. Perhaps it was for strength. Perhaps it was simply for one more day without loss. The door creaked open again, and a figure stepped in quickly, breath clouding in the air. It was Jakob, cheeks flushed from running. His words spilled out in a rush. "They've taken the Millers. They're coming for the rest." The room stilled. Even the fire seemed to hush. The boy's father set down his spoon, his expression hardening, not in anger but in grim understanding. "Tell the others," he said quietly. "We will meet tonight." Boy's heart pounded, not with the rush of surprise, but with the heavy certainty that this day, like so many before, had shifted. The hidden hope he carried, peace someday, felt more fragile than ever. Around the table, his siblings' eyes widened, though no one spoke. Their mother only bowed her head, lips moving in silent prayer. Yet still, outside, the snow caught light. Still, the valley lay wrapped in morning calm. Still, chores pressed on, for animals did not wait for politics, and hunger did not pause for fear. The boy rose, pulling his coat tighter. His father's voice, steady as ever, broke the silence. "There is work to do." And so they moved again, each to their place, each to their task, as the day opened not into peace, but into the fragile balance of survival and faith. The boy carried the basket of eggs toward the table, feeling their weight as both burden and blessing. He thought again of his wish. Peace. Just one day without fear. One day when the sound of hoofbeats would mean nothing more than a neighbor coming to call. Perhaps such a day would never come here. Perhaps it lay across the sea, in a land not yet known. But for now, he held the wish quietly, as one holds a fragile egg, careful, steady, knowing how easily it could be broken. Familiar tasks fold gently around tired but steady hands. The house grew quiet again after Jakob's hurried message, though quiet of a different kind. Not the gentle silence of early morning when the snow muffles sound, but the kind of silence that follows a heavy truth, when words are useless, when every heart is busy listening to its own fear. The boy set the basket of eggs carefully on the table, as though afraid even the crack of a shell might disturb that stillness. His younger sister traced a finger along the rim of her bowl, her small lips pressed together. Their mother's hands moved as if by instinct, tidying, stoking the fire, folding a cloth that did not need folding. Sometimes action was the only shield against dread. Outside, the light strengthened, touching the snow-covered fields with pale gold. Smoke rose straight into the still air from neighboring chimneys, as though nothing had changed. Chickens clucked. A horse stamped in its stall. Somewhere in the forest, a crow gave its harsh call. The world carried on, indifferent to the tremors in human hearts. The boy stepped to the doorway, leaning against the frame, and let his eyes roam across the valley. 12 families lived within sight, scattered homesteads, each holding within them the same fear now planted in his own chest. The Millers had been seized. Who would be next? His father joined him, the lines of worry deepening around his eyes, though his voice remained calm. "There are fences around every farm," he murmured. "Wood, stone, or hedge. But the truest fence is silence." He did not explain further, yet the boy understood. Words were dangerous, prayers whispered too loudly, hymns sung in the wrong earshot, even kindness shown at the wrong time. Any of these could betray them. Their faith, lived openly, was considered rebellion. So silence became survival, a wall higher than any built from timber. The boy's hands itched to do something, anything. He lifted the water pail and carried it to the well outside, boots crunching over the hard snow. The rope squeaked as he lowered the bucket down into the dark shaft. A hollow splash came up, followed by the cold weight of water as he drew it back. He cradled the bucket against his leg as he walked, feeling it sway. and in that moment thought of how fragile life was. One careless step on ice, one slip of the rope, and the precious water would be lost. In the same way, one wrong word could spill out and undo an entire family. Back inside, his mother ladled hot water into a basin for washing. Her fingers were cracked, red from the cold, each mark a testament to endless labor. Yet she carried herself with steady dignity. She caught the boy's gaze and offered a faint smile, one that spoke not of comfort, but of endurance. It was the smile of someone who knew how little control they had over tomorrow, yet who refused to let today slip away without usefulness. She reached for a piece of linen, worn but clean, and began stitching again. Each stitch pulled the cloth together. Each stitch was a small refusal to unravel. The boy's sister hummed softly at her task, the same low tune she had been taught by their mother while learning to sew. The tune carried memory of ancestors who had hummed it centuries before, of women who had worked by candlelight in other cold rooms, fleeing other authorities. The sound wrapped around the boy like a thread, holding him steady. It reminded him that their suffering was not new, nor was it theirs alone. Later, his father motioned for him to follow out into the yard. Together they walked to the woodpile, where the stacked logs reached shoulder height. "We will need more," his father said simply, lifting the axe. The boy took his place beside him, setting a log upright on the chopping block. The rhythm began. Raise, strike, split. The sound echoed through the cold air, each thud sharp, final. Wood chips scattered, snowflakes caught on the edges of fresh-cut grain. The work warmed them quickly, sweat gathering beneath layers of wool despite the winter chill. It was work that silenced thought, forcing the body into motion. Yet behind every strike was the knowledge that soldiers might come, that every log split could be interrupted by hoofbeats on the road. As they worked, the boy's father spoke again, his voice low but firm. "Silence is not weakness. It is strength. The louder the world demands we bow, the quieter we answer. That is how our people have endured." The boy nodded, though part of him longed to shout, to demand why faith must be hidden like a crime. But he swallowed those words, holding them as tightly as he held the axe handle. By midday, the sky had grown brighter, though clouds gathered at the edges promising more snow. The family gathered for their meal, bread coarse and dry, a few pieces of stored apple, thin broth warmed on the fire. They ate in near silence, broken only by the clink of spoons and the sigh of steam. Yet the silence was not empty. It held layers, unspoken prayers, unvoiced worries, the quiet binding of family to family. Each glance, each shared task, each spoonful carried meaning beyond words. After eating, the boy joined his younger brother in the barn to spread fresh straw. The calf born that morning lay curled against its mother, breath rising in gentle clouds. The sight softened the boy's heart. Life continued, fragile but insistent, even when danger loomed. He knelt to stroke the calf's damp coat, its warmth surprising against his chilled hand. In that simple act, he felt both the tenderness of creation and the weight of responsibility. Survival was measured not only in food and shelter, but in the care of creatures entrusted to them. From the barn door, he glimpsed Jakob again, moving quickly along the path toward another farm. Word was being carried quietly from house to house, like sparks of fire passed hand to hand, invisible from a distance, yet powerful in what they could ignite. Plans were forming. Decisions would have to be made. Run, hide, or endure. None of the choices were without cost. The boy returned inside as afternoon light slanted low across the floorboards. His mother bent over her stitching, his sisters busy with tasks, his father writing a short note in careful script, a verse to be read later when neighbors gathered. The boy sat, listening to the sounds, needle pulling thread, firewood shifting, breath steady in and out. The silence was heavy, but it was not hopeless. It was filled with determination, with the stubborn will to remain faithful even when unseen. As dusk approached, shadows stretched across the snow. The family prepared for evening prayer, voices low, each word deliberate. They prayed for the Millers, now in chains, for their own safety, for courage to face whatever came. The boy's eyes closed as he listened, the words settling into him like falling snow, quiet, relentless, covering every surface with a pale persistence. When the prayer ended, the boy lingered by the window. The valley lay hushed, stars emerging one by one. Somewhere beyond those ridges, soldiers planned their steps. Somewhere within these homes, families whispered of escape. Between those two forces he stood, a boy on the edge of history, carrying silence like a shield. His hand rested against the cold glass, and he breathed slow, steady. For tonight, they were still together. For tonight, the fences of silence still held. Winter's snow presses low, reshaping well-known paths. By morning, the world had been made over in white. The night's fall lay deep upon the fields and hedgerows, smoothing every line, rounding every hard angle until even the woodpile seemed a gentle hill. Fences disappeared up to the rails, stone markers turned to soft humps, and the road that yesterday invited footsteps now hid itself like a stream under ice. Winter, when it comes in full, is not only weather, it is a way of quieting things, a long hand set lightly over the valley to hush it. The boy stood at the threshold and took the measure of it. Snow had drifted against the door, and he had to lean his shoulder into the wood to open a narrow wedge. The edge of cold that came through made his eyes water. It smelled of iron and pine and far ridgelines. He listened without meaning to, the way people do when the world is covered, the way sound travels farther, cleaner. No wagon, no voices. Only the soft, settling noises of a house warming itself, and somewhere behind him, his mother stirring the fire to a brighter glow. Winter changed the arithmetic of the day. Steps took longer. Chores stretched. It made small errands inward, thoughtful things, measuring out the oats with care, choosing which axe head to wedge, deciding which path to break first. He tugged on his mittens, wool under leather, and crossed the threshold into the new country their yard had become. Each step sank and squeaked. Breath rose and drifted. At the well, he brushed aside a hollow of snow to find the lid, then pried it open with the flat of his hand, hearing the small sound of the hinge, a domestic noise that said, "Here, for now, is still home." He worked deliberately, the way his father had taught him, tasks bundled so that each helped the next. A path to the woodshed first, so wood could be fetched to dry by the hearth. Then a trench to the hen house for eggs and feedings. Then a shortcut to the barn, kicked through and widened by repeated passing. Every time he turned, the wind laid back the hair along his temple. Frost gathered on the length of his scarf where it crossed his breath. It was not the sort of cold that argued. It simply announced itself and remained, and you did your sums with it in mind. By the time he reached the barn, the sky had lightened to a pale, almost pearl color. Inside, the air was warmer by a few forgiving degrees, sweet with hay and the steam of animal breath. The cow, relieved of last night's work, stood protectively near her calf, who wobbled at the pale business of standing and forecast a lifetime of ordinary needs. Water set, bedding refreshed, hooves cleaned, a stall scraped and made right. So much of life was this, the good, repeating labor that asks for a steady back rather than a bright remark. The boy felt better in it, as one does when the hands know what to do. His father was already there, the sleeves of his shirt rolled neatly despite the cold. He inspected the plow blade hung by leather from a peg, shook his head with a small sound that was not complaint but recognition. "We'll need the smith for that come spring," he said. And then the smallest pause, as both of them felt the lack the sentence carried. The millers would not be mending blades this season. The thought moved through the barn like a draft, not sharp enough to chill, but enough to be noticed. "Set your mind to the runners," the father said after a time, nodding toward the family cart. "Snow like this, we'll need them." They worked in companionable quiet, sawing old ash slats to the right length, drilling pilot holes with a hand brace, lashing with rawhide softened and pulled tight. The cart, born for wheels, accepted its winter legs with a certain humility, as if agreeing to a compromise it had known would come. The boy liked this kind of work, joining wood to wood, answering the season with a change of shape. When they slid the cart a pace or two across the barn floor, it made a different sound, longer, smoother, a hush of wood on packed snow, and his father allowed himself a small, approving breath. Back at the house, Winter made other adjustments. The women's hands turned to the spinning in the loom, to socks that would hold heat against bone, and to seams that would not surrender under repeated wet. His mother warmed her fingers by the hearth, and then returned to her needle. Each stitch was modest, but together they made shelter. His sisters worked in the rhythm girls learn without being taught. Pass, pull, smooth, pass, pull, smooth. Between them grew not only a length of cloth, but the unhurried conversation of people who understand time as a generous thing, if treated with respect. The boy brought in an armful of wood and stood for a moment in the bliss of heat. Snow melted in blots upon his sleeves. The room held a lived-in order. Pewter cups set mouth down upon the shelf, a Bible pushed up from the table's edge to make room for bowls, a broom leaning where a hand could find it without looking. He liked to think that Winter respected such order, that the season would hesitate a moment at the threshold of a well-kept home and agree to be at least a fair guest. From the window, the lane could barely be traced. The usual marks, cart ruts, boot tracks, the wedge-shaped imprints of chickens were faint memories under the new fall. Yet there, beyond the hedgerow, a darker line suggested movement. The boy watched, steadying his breath, and then made out the shape. Not riders, only a neighbor with a shoulder pole, two small baskets hung on cords, walking with the careful gait of someone who planned to remain upright. When the knock came, soft to spare the door from shock, his mother had already set aside her work. It was old Mrs. Lapfuse, cheeks high with weather, eyes bright, as if winter were something she had decided long ago to grant permission to. She stood just inside the door, bringing with her a little wind and a scent of snow. "I've eggs more than we need," she said, though the baskets told a truer story. Enough for sharing, not abundance. "And I wondered about your cow." The mother thanked her, and in the movement of hands, between women, basket lifted, cloth folded back, eggs touched and counted, was a language the boy loved. It said this: "I see you. I remember what you did when the churn broke, and I have not forgotten the way you stood in the yard that night when the wolves came nearer than was comfortable." It said, "I have very little, but I will make a small more out of it, and you will take half." The old woman warmed her palms at the hearth and took the offered stool. She had news, but told it the way one spreads jam thinly to make it last, little by little, small circles. Patrols had taken the road south of the mill. A watchman in the village had asked too casual a question about who worshipped where. She did not dramatize. She did not need to. Facts have a way of carrying their own weight. The mother nodded, once and again, and kept the kettle on. "We will keep to the forest edge," she said, mostly to herself, "and we will go by twos." The boy watched his father hear the same news, though differently, the way a fence builder listens for which post will bear the strain. He saw the brief touch of his parents' eyes across the room, a look so quick it might have been missed by someone unused to reading such glances. It was, in its quiet way, a whole conversation. Tonight, at the elders, speak gently to the little ones. See that the sled is ready, the Bible to be wrapped against damp. If the bell sounds, we go to the north path. After the neighbor had gone, the day settled once more into its winter pace. The boy cut kindling, stacked it in a neat box, then took up the broom to sweep the small drifts the door kept making upon the floor. He liked the feeling of making a clear path where there had been confusion. There was comfort and visible improvement. He salted the threshold lightly the way his mother had taught him, not to waste, but to make the ice think twice before it formed again. Toward noon, a hush came that was not only weather. Snow sometimes pauses to listen. A valley sometimes holds its breath. The boy stepped out with a pail for the well and heard what the pause revealed. A single jay scolding from a spruce, the far hammering of someone mending a hinge, the faintest, most ordinary sound of children somewhere laughing and then remembering to keep still. Even laughter learned winter's manners. He stood a moment longer than the pail required and let the wide quiet settle into him. Then he worked his way along the new sled track toward the barn, set the pail, checked the calf, ran his glove along the cow's neck the way his father did. He felt the low sound the animal made more than he heard it, a rumble that said the barn was not empty of conversation, merely short of language human ears recognize. In this world, comfort was often carried by creatures who have no words for it. When he returned, his mother put a hand lightly to his sleeve, nothing dramatic, simply a reminder of presence, and then gave him a wool scarf she had warmed by the hearth. Her hands were rough, the skin worked into a geography of winter, but the warmth she offered through so small a gesture sent an ease through him that no speech could. "Take it," she said, as if lending him a piece of mild weather to carry outdoors. Afternoon brought the small councils families hold when they expect to be called to larger ones by nightfall. They spoke softly, as people do when walls might learn to listen, and said only what needed saying. If the cart must go, who will lead the horse? Which blanket goes on top? The small pouch of documents, births and baptisms recorded in careful hand, would ride against the father's chest. The boy's task was plain: notice. He would walk with his eyes open and his mouth shut, and would keep in mind where the maple with the double trunk stood, where the creek crossed under snow with a long, hollow sound, where the rock with the lichen like a man's beard leaned toward the path. It was a kind of map you keep not in the pocket, but behind the eyes. Near sundown, as the sky turned to a bell of pewter over the ridge, the boy stepped out to beat snow from the hems of his trousers and saw something that winter kept for those who look. A light fox, small as a tucked blanket, marking its way across the untouched field with a stitcher's neatness. It paused, lifted its nose, and then went on. He felt oddly heartened by the tidy certainty of it. Even in seasons of fear, the living world kept to its ordinary errands. It is a comfort sometimes to be reminded that not everything is about us. Inside, they ate early. Soup made from root and broth, bread softened by its steam. The sisters took their places at the loom again, turning the shuttle with the confidence of people who know that making is a form of prayer. The mother laid aside her work and wrapped food in cloth for later. The father looked over the sled runners once more, then set the axe in a spot where a hand would find it in the dark on the first try. There is a kindness in arranging the world for your own future panic. A kettle at the front of the shelf, matches high from small hands, the latch string left inside. The boy sat at the end of the table where the lamplight thinned. He let his head rest against the post and counted quietly, the way he had that morning. But now, in another measure, how many breaths, how many heartbeats, until the bell that would mean gather? It did not come, not yet. Winter, which had draped itself over the day like a heavy cloak, seemed to press a little closer to listen. The house met its listening with its own. Boards answered the wind with a creak that was neither complaint nor boast. The fire shifted its weight and settled. He thought of the Millers then, and said a small prayer that named them without making demands. It was not a prayer that asked for signs. He had learned, in the school winter makes of a young man, that the holiest answers are often ordinary. A door untroubled through the night, a path that holds, a neighbor's knock that brings not danger, but bread. He traded his fear for usefulness and rose to check the latch. When he returned, his mother folded him briefly into her arms. It was not lingering. Time had other plans, but it was enough. In her ear he said nothing, and she answered with the old language all mothers learn, that small pressure of hand between shoulder blades that says, "Go on, I know," and the even older reply a child makes without sound, "I will, I do." And winter, hearing itself named without bitterness in the house's work and speech, went on being winter, which is to say it kept them close, asked them to move slowly, and invited them to speak in the soft voice it prefers. Concern moves quietly in glances more than in words. The next morning broke with a thin light, almost reluctant, as though the sun itself had wearied of the heavy sky. Frost etched delicate feathers across the window glass, and the boy traced them absently with his finger while he waited for his father to speak. Nothing was said at first, but everything was felt. Silence, once again, carried the weight of the day. Around the table, the family moved with careful rhythm. Bread was cut and shared, porridge ladled into bowls. Children reached for spoons with reddened hands. Yet beneath the ordinary gestures, there hummed a tension, not loud, but constant, like the faint ringing one hears after a heavy blow. The boy caught his mother's eye across the room. She did not frown, she did not smile. She only gave the smallest tilt of her head, a signal that said, "Be still, be watchful." It was in these unspoken exchanges that the family now lived. Words, once free, had become costly. A wrong word could betray them. A loud word could carry farther than intended. Even hopeful words, spoken too boldly, could break a fragile peace. So they spoke in glances. A raised brow, a shift of hand on the table, a breath drawn just slightly sharper than before. The boy was learning to read these glances the way one reads weather, seeing in them warnings, reassurances, instructions that would never be written down. After breakfast, his father motioned him outside. Together they crossed the yard, boots crunching in the brittle snow. Smoke from the chimney streamed upward without a quiver of wind, straight and sure, a pillar against the pale sky. "We keep our speech close," his father said at last, voice low. "The soldiers hunger for words more than bread. They will use them against us if they can." The boy nodded, though his heart longed to ask questions. Why must their faith be hidden? Why must kindness be masked in caution? But he kept those words tucked away, feeling them press against his chest. He had learned the lesson well. Sometimes the truest loyalty is to say nothing at all. They worked at the sled again, tightening lashings, smoothing the runners with tallow so they would glide more easily over snow. His father showed him how to test the rope for frays, how to place the knots so they could be undone quickly if needed. "Tools should obey," his father murmured, "but they also should be ready to part when the hour comes." The boy understood. They were building for travel, but also for flight. At midday, Jakob came by again, his steps brisk, eyes wary. He spoke little, but his presence alone carried news. The community was stirring. Families were packing quietly, arranging small bundles of food, tools, blankets. Not enough to look like preparation for a journey. Only enough that, if the bell should toll, they could vanish within the hour. Jakob's glance told more than his words. "Be ready." The boy noticed how his father answered without a word. A brief touch to Jakob's arm, a nod, then a return to work. It was a conversation made entirely of silence, yet full of meaning. The boy felt a strange pride watching it, realizing that strength was not always loud. Sometimes strength meant folding speech inward until only what was necessary remained. That afternoon, the boy's mother sent him with his sister to fetch water. As they walked the path together, snow crunching beneath their feet, she whispered, "Do you think they will come tonight?" He hesitated, unsure whether to answer. Then he remembered his father's teaching. Instead of a reply, he reached for her mittened hand and squeezed it once. It was enough. She fell silent, but her grip tightened, and in that pressure she found reassurance. When they returned, the house was busy with small, careful tasks. His mother had spread blankets on the floor, checking for tears that might let in cold. His younger siblings gathered candles, trimming wicks, and setting them into holders. The boy joined his father by the hearth, sharpening knives on a whetstone. The scrape of steel on stone filled the room with its measured rhythm. Every sound mattered. Even the scrape carried a message. We are preparing. We are steady. We are not afraid. Later, as dusk drew near, the family gathered for prayer. They knelt together, hands folded, heads bowed. His father's voice carried slowly through the dim room. He prayed for the Millers, for neighbors in hiding, for children yet too young to understand the danger that hung over them. His words were steady, but the boy noticed his hands, how they trembled ever so slightly as they rested on the wooden table. The boy lowered his gaze quickly, unwilling to expose that tremor with his eyes. Some truths, too, deserved silence. The fire burned lower as evening deepened. Shadows moved across the walls, flickering in patterns that seemed almost alive. The boy sat with his younger brother, helping him shape small animals from scraps of wood. The younger child laughed softly as the figures took shape. A horse, a lamb, a bird. The sound was gentle, innocent. The boy smiled, though behind it he felt the sharp ache of fear. Would this laughter be allowed tomorrow, or would silence swallow it too? At one point, the boy's eyes met his mother's again. She gave him that same small tilt of the head, a gesture he now understood well. It meant, stay close, keep watch. He nodded faintly, then returned to carving. The night wore on with a kind of patient waiting. They moved from task to task, speaking little, communicating in the language of glances and gestures. In this quiet, the boy discovered something unexpected, a sense of closeness deeper than words could provide. Silence was not only a barrier, it was also a bond. It forced them to notice, to attend, to listen with their whole selves. Outside, snow fell again, soft and steady, covering the tracks of the day. Inside, glances passed like lanterns in the dark, lighting the way without a sound. The boy lay down at last on the straw mattress. His siblings pressed close for warmth. His father checked the latch one more time. His mother folded her hands in prayer, and all was still. The boy closed his eyes, holding the memory of those silent glances. They were fragile, yet they held strength enough to carry a family through the dark. A neighbor's worries mirror the weight you carry. Morning drifted in like a shy guest, pausing at the threshold, then stepping softly through the rooms. The fire held its orange heart. Steam rose from the kettle in a thin, faithful thread. Outside, the new snow lay in careful folds, as if the valley had been tucked in by a gentle hand. The boy tied his scarf, pulled on his mittens, and lifted the latch. Cold greeted him without malice, just truth, and he took it in with a slow breath that cleared his mind. Today, the path would reach beyond the fence. His father had set the task simply. Walk to the Stoltzfus place. See what they know. Carry what we can share. Bring back what we can carry. The boy nodded, and his mother placed a wrapped loaf into his arms, still warm from the hearth. He felt its weight like a small sun. Beside it she tucked a skein of wool, tight wound and clean. The kind of gift that meant more than words right now. For their little ones, she said, and for hands that have been mending too long. He stepped into the new day's silence. The path he'd stamped yesterday had filled again, though its memory remained beneath the powder. His boot found it by habit. Trees held their white burdens without complaint. A jay crossed the lane in a blue line and scolded once, then thought better of it, as if winter had reminded even birds to mind their manners. The boy passed the maple with the double trunk, the one he kept in his mind's map, and descended toward the Stoltzfus barn, roofline wearing a second roof of snow. He had come here 100 times, but the house felt different now, not because of anything seen, but because of everything felt. It is a strange talent fear has, to tint the ordinary without changing a single board or hinge. The boy knocked softly, twice, then once, and waited. That was the agreed way. When the door opened, it was Margaret who stood there, the blacksmith's daughter, whose eyes always carried a thoughtful kind of light, as if she were listening not only to your words, but also to the pauses between them. "Come in," she said, and stepped back. Her cheeks were pink with stove heat and winter air, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, flour dusting them as if she had put her hands into a bag of dawn. The room beyond held the neat disorder of a working morning, bowls out, a child's wooden comb on the sill, a length of linen pinned neatly to a chair back. The smell was warm, bread beginning to lift, broth remembering yesterday's bones. "We brought what we could," the boy said, offering the loaf and the wool. He did not say more. There was no need. Margaret took them with a small nod that was all gratitude and no flourish. "Then we will be fed today," she answered. "And what I can't eat, I will knit." She smiled in that quiet way of hers. He felt something ease in him at that, how some people, without trying, make a room feel steadier. Her mother, Mrs. Stoltzfus, sat by the window where the light was better, darning a heel with swift, competent motions. She looked up, eyes kind, then returned to her needle. Your cow? She asked, the way neighbors ask about a child. He nodded. Well, he said, the calf stands. The woman gave a small, satisfied sound. Then you will drink, she said, and so will we a little, if ever your milk wander in our direction. It was the kind of joke people hear made in trouble. Half true, half tender, never quite a laugh, but close enough to remind everyone that their mouths could still shape something other than worry. The boy set his mittens near the hearth to dry and unwrapped his scarf, steam rising faintly where snow had melted into it. In the corner, 2 younger Stoltzfus children argued in whispers over a peg doll, then remembered themselves and continued the argument by exchanging wide-eyed looks that said every word they didn't say. He smiled at their seriousness. Children can learn silence with surprising grace when silence is the only safe song. Margaret set a cup of hot water on the table and dropped into it a crushed pinch of dried herb. Thyme, she explained. It keeps the throat honest in winter. He thanked her and warmed his hands around the cup. In the steam, he smelled the hills where the herb had grown last summer, the sun on stones, the edges of a field where bees had worked and gone. To drink such a small medicine felt like remembering an easier season without asking it to return too soon. He told, in the careful way of these days, what he knew. Jakob's message, the patrols, the elders' plan to meet. Margaret told, in equally careful language, what they knew. A shopkeeper who asked too many mild questions, tracks on the south road frozen into the ruts, a cousin's letter carried underhems from a village where fines had become arrests. They will turn us into an example if they can, she said, and we must not give them something tidy to display. There was no panic in her voice, only the sober accounting of a ledger everyone here learned to keep. The boy thought of his father's axe, of the way each split log found its place and made the stack truer. Words could do this too. If chosen with care, they could make the day truer. Mrs. Stoltzfus set aside her darning and rose to stir the pot at the hearth. We will need to travel light, she said, not looking up, and keep our kindnesses light as well. Just enough to move the world a finger's breadth, not so much that anyone noticing would call it treason. She pressed the spoon against the pot's side with a quiet scrape. We may share bread in bowls, and we may share news in glances. That is the measure for now. A door opened in the back room and missed her. Stoltzfus stepped in, a broad-shouldered man whose hands had known iron since boyhood. Without the millers, without the blacksmith tools that had been taken when the shop was sealed, he had become the village's memory of metalwork, and he carried that memory in the careful way he lifted a small hinge from his pocket, something he had salvaged and made right again in the borrowed hours. He set it on the table without ceremony and turned it in his palm so that its pin gleamed true. If you must go fast, he said, this will not fail you. He offered it to the boy. For a box that ought not to come open unless you ask it. The boy took it with the reverence such usefulness deserves. A small hinge, unremarkable to anyone who did not live in a world where small things made the difference between safety and trouble. He imagined the little chest at home. Documents, a bit of coin, the family Bible's red ribbon folded to mark the births. A hinge that never betrayed its lid could be as holy as a prayer. After a time, Margaret asked if he would step out with her to check the snare lines. It was a neighborly errand, and there was nothing unusual in 2 young people walking through snow to look at a loop of cord drawn across a rabbit's path. Still, they went with the attentiveness winter teaches, watching where the ground hollowed, listening for the wrong sound, keeping to the thickets when they could. The world had asked them to move like deer, and they had learned. The air outside was clean and still. New flakes had begun to drift, curious rather than urgent, and they settled on the dark skirts of scrub pine like ash from a distant, harmless fire. Their boots made that agreeable churr in deep cold, and the boy, for a few minutes, let his breath find a slow pace. Margaret walked beside him without hurrying talk. Near the willow bend, she paused and brushed snow from a low branch to reveal the shape of a looped cord. Empty. She reset it with the quiet skill of practice, fingers bare for only a heartbeat. "Do you ever feel," she said finally, eyes on her, "work, as if your thoughts are like these paths, used every day until even when it snows, you know exactly where they run?" He turned that over as one turns a smooth stone in the pocket. "I suppose I do," he said. "I think of the roads we might take if the bell sounds, the faces I hope not to leave, the verses I've been told to keep close, and I think of how my father says to speak, or not to." She nodded. "I think of my father's hands on the iron," she said, "how he always said metal tells the truth if you don't rush it. And then I think of how the men who took him rushed everything, paper, words, doors, all of it, and how nothing truthful can come of speed." Her voice stayed even, but he heard the small pebble of grief in it, and he did not pick it up to examine. He just let it rest where it was. They checked another snare, also empty, and turned for home by a longer curve that kept them under trees. From there they could see the valley in a lay the boy liked, fields set like pages, dwellings like tidy words, a winter paragraph written by careful hands. Smoke lifted from 4 chimneys. The 5th was still. He and Margaret both noticed, then both decided not to say the name that belonged to that roof. In a season of listening, sometimes the kind thing is not to speak the obvious sadness aloud. "When I was younger," Margaret said after a time, "I used to think courage would sound like a shout. Now I think it sounds like a latch lifting at the right moment, or a footstep that knows when to be soft." The boy thought of the hinge in his pocket, the steady heat of the wrapped loaf he'd delivered, the skein of wool like a sleeping bird in Margaret's arms. "I think it sounds like small things done exactly right," he said. They walked a while without speech, and in that pause the winter birds filled the space with their thin calls, great chorus of little patience. Near the fence, a hare, startled, went off in lovely loops and found the hole it had made along the hedge. They both smiled at its tidy wisdom. At the Stoltzfus gate, Margaret stopped and looked at him in that attentive way of hers. "If you go," she said, and did not have to finish the sentence. They both knew the rest. "Leave something ordinary behind, a spoon on the table, a towel on the peg. So when you return, you can begin again without thinking too hard." He nodded. It was such a good instruction, and so gentle, that he held it the way one holds a match in wind. "I'll remember," he said. Inside, Mrs. Stoltzfus pressed a small parcel into his hands, dried apple slices folded in cloth, and a paper twist of salt. "You can carry a handful of summer," she said, "and a pinch of the sea. Either can save a stew." She said it practically, like a recipe, but her eyes were bright in a way that told more. She kissed the top of his cap the way grandmothers do, whether they are kin or not. Mr. Stoltzfus walked him to the threshold. "When iron bends at the right heat," he murmured, "it stays put. Remember that when someone tries to force time." He squeezed the boy's shoulder with a smith's hand, gentle in a way large hands can be only when they choose to. Margaret stood at the doorframe, a woolen scarf over one arm, the skein his mother had sent looped neatly in her other hand. "I will make socks tonight," she said. "If we go warm." She smiled, not in brightness, but in steadiness. "Walk on the packed places," she added softly. "Save your legs for whatever matters." He stepped back into the pale day, the new flakes touching his cap and melting into it. The parcel in his pocket knocked lightly as he walked, a companionable sound. He retraced his steps by the thin memory of the path and noticed how the morning had filled with small answers. A hinge that would not betray, time to steady a throat. A sentence about spoons and towels to mark an ordinary return. None of it was dramatic. All of it was enough. At the crest of the rise above his family's house, he stopped to take the place in. The dark line of the roof, the trail he'd cut at dawn now softened by falling lace. Smoke rose from their chimney in a steady stream. The sight gave him a warmth no hearth could duplicate. He thought again of Margaret's question. Do thoughts find their paths and keep them even in snow? He hoped so. There were paths of prayer he meant to keep trodden, and paths of kindness, and the narrow footway his mother called wisdom, which ran between silence and speech like a brook under ice. His mother opened before he knocked, as if mothers can hear from rooms away the footstep they raised. "You were expected," she said, with the small humor that says, "I worried, but I chose faith." She took the parcel at once to the cupboard, where gifts are honored by disappearing into use. His father listened to the report with that same fence builder's focus. What post, what rail, where the strain would be. He touched the hinge with his thumb and nodded once, already finding the place where it belonged. The boy set his mittens by the fire and watched his sisters arrange chairs a little closer than usual, as if the room had shrunk, not from fear, but to keep the conversation among family. When he told the sentence about spoons and towels, his mother smiled, and for a heartbeat, the room felt entirely ordinary, as if this winter were like any other, and the worst danger they faced was a cold draft along the floor. In the afternoon, he went with his father to pack a small chest, not the heavy one, they were not fools, but the thin-lidded box that had traveled once before, back when his grandparents were young. Papers went in, folded and wrapped. A coin or two, the kind that buys salt and silence when either is needed. A length of cord, an empty cloth bag, ready to hold what might be gathered in hurry. He set the new hinge and tested it twice. It answered with the snug, honest sound of things made right. His father said nothing in praise, but his silence shaped itself into approval all the same. By evening, as the light thinned to pewter again, the family sat without lamps for a time to let their eyes learn the dark, the way they always did when a night might ask them to move carefully. In the hush, the boy felt the neighbor house in his bones, as if a thread now connected the two kitchens, the breath at two hearths braiding into a stronger rope. This is what he had come to understand. Community was not noise and bustle. It was this deep alignment of simple lives, tilted in the same direction, prepared to act without trumpeting it. Supper was a thickened broth and a heel of bread split exactly. He thought of time and of a hinge, of socks begun and paths reset. He thought of a hare's neat loops and the hole in the hedge that had been remembered so perfectly a body could find it without thinking. He thought how courage, as Margaret had said, might be a latch lifted at the right moment, or a footstep that knew when to be soft. When the house was near to sleep, he wrote a small verse on a scrap for his pocket. Not many words, only enough to feel with his fingers in the dark if he needed them. He did not read it aloud. He did not need to. It was the kind of verse that keeps its shape better in silence. Before lying down, he set a spoon on the table and hung a towel on the peg. An ordinary promise, set gently in like a marker stone. It made him ache a little in the good way. Hope has a weight too, but it also settled him. If they returned, they would find their lives ready to be taken up in the middle, not from the hard beginning. He lay between his brothers, the warmth of small bodies like warm stones by a fire. Snow thickened its quiet on the roof. Somewhere, a fox stepped neatly through the hedgerow, and in the Stoltzfus kitchen, a skein of wool turned into the first of a pair of socks. The boy let that picture be the last light in his mind before sleep. The neighbor's hands moving, steady and sure, making comfort out of a thin thread because thin threads braided hold. Kindness appears in the shape of small, steady gifts. The morning unfolded in pale gray layers, like paper pulled one sheet at a time from an old book. Frost held fast to the window edges, and the fire's glow deepened to meet it. The boy stirred before his siblings, rising quietly, careful not to wake the smaller ones pressed close for warmth. He pulled on his boots, stiff from yesterday's wet snow, and stepped into the cool hush of the house. On the table, his mother had already left a small task for him, a basket half filled with turnips, the last of the autumn's cellar crop. Alongside them lay a folded cloth and a slip of paper, on which she had written in her careful hand a verse of blessing. He understood at once. This was to be taken to the Kaufmans, whose youngest had been fevered. It was not a gift of plenty, just what they could spare, but it would mean something. He held the basket against his chest and stepped outside. The air was brittle, each breath like glass in his lungs. The snow had settled during the night, softening the paths once again. He made his way slowly, boots sinking deep, his eyes scanning the valley as he went. Every household was carrying out small acts like this, unseen by others, unrecorded, yet forming the threads that bound them into one fabric. When he reached the Kaufman door, he paused, knocking lightly so as not to disturb the sick child. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Kaufman, eyes tired but kind. She said nothing at first, only looked at the basket, then at him. He placed it in her hands and bowed his head slightly, letting the gesture speak. Her lips trembled, but she mastered them, nodding once in gratitude. The verse slipped from the cloth into her fingers, and she pressed it to her chest as though it were food itself. Inside, the house carried the smell of broth and damp cloths. A child coughed softly from the loft. The boy did not linger. He touched the brim of his cap and stepped back into the cold, leaving the small warmth of the gift behind. As he turned, he caught sight of Mr. Kaufman through the barn window, bent over a stall, tending a restless horse. Even in sickness, work pressed on. It was the way of their people. On his walk back, the boy considered the strangeness of giving away when there was so little to keep. Yet he felt lighter, not poorer. The act itself seemed to carry warmth back into his own chest. He thought of the verse his mother had chosen, "Give, and it shall be given unto you." Simple words, but ones that echoed more deeply on mornings like this, when every bite of food was measured, every log of wood counted. Back at his own home, he found his sisters bent over their stitching, their heads nearly touching as they worked from the same skein. His father was oiling the sled runners, checking each lash with the concentration of a man who knows failure is not an option. On the hearth, his mother ladled broth into cups made of tin, pressing one into his hand with a small smile. "You've walked the valley this morning," she said. Drink and let the steam thaw your bones." He sipped slowly, letting the hot liquid chase the chill from his chest. His younger brother tugged at his sleeve, holding out a tiny carved bird. "For you," the child whispered, "to carry in your pocket." The boy laughed softly, ruffling his brother's hair. The bird was rough, uneven, hardly more than a suggestion of wings, but it was precious. It was the kind of gift that said, "I see you. I want you to remember me if we must part." He slipped it into his pocket beside the hinge he had received from the Stoltzfus family. 2 gifts, small, steady, now carried with him. The day moved forward with the rhythm of tasks. Snow was cleared again from the roofline. The cow was milked, her calf nudged closer to warmth. Logs were split and stacked. Each act seemed ordinary, yet each one carried within it a layer of preparation, as though the family were weaving not only for today, but for the uncertain nights ahead. At midday, Jakob appeared at the threshold, shoulders dusted with snow. He brought with him a small bundle of dried beans. "Mother says you should have these," he explained, his eyes flicking quickly to the side as though measuring the weight of what could be said aloud. The boy's mother accepted them with a nod, then pressed into his hand a wedge of cheese wrapped in cloth. "Take this back," she said, "and tell her the beans will see us through, but the taste of her labor will cheer us more." The exchange was quick, quiet, and complete. Gifts passed both ways, not measured by fairness, but by need and by love. Jakob lingered only a moment, then pulled his hood tighter and slipped back into the storm. As evening drew near, the boy sat by the hearth, carving again. His younger siblings leaned close, watching the shape take form. Tonight, it was not an animal, but a cross, small enough to fit in the palm. His knife moved carefully, each stroke planned. When he finished, he placed it into his sister's hand. "Hold this when you're afraid," he told her softly. She clutched it, eyes wide with seriousness. Another gift, small but steady, passed into hands that needed it. Later, as the family gathered for prayer, the boy felt the weight of these gifts in his pocket and in his heart. A hinge, a bird, beans, cheese, a loaf, a skein of wool, a carved cross, each one ordinary, yet each one carrying more than its material worth. Together they formed a shield, invisible but real, made of kindness. When the prayer ended, the boy lay down, his siblings curled close beside him. He thought of the valley, of houses where bread had been shared, where verses had been whispered, where children had carved small tokens for brothers to carry. He realized then that even if soldiers came, even if houses were emptied, these gifts could not be taken. They lived in memory, in gratitude, in the fabric of the community itself. Plans bend gently as skies and roots change. The storm of the previous night had left the land softened and strange, as if the familiar valley had pulled on a new garment of white. The fences leaned beneath the weight of snow, and the trees bent low, their branches etched in glassy frost. It was morning again, though the sky gave little sign. Gray upon gray, cloud folded over cloud, dimming the light until it seemed the sun itself had decided to hide. The family rose with the same quiet rhythm, their movements practiced and unhurried. The boy pulled on his boots, noticing how the leather was beginning to crack at the seams. He flexed his toes against the chill, then wrapped another strip of cloth around his ankles, a trick his father had taught him to stave off frostbite. Such small adaptations marked their days now, nothing permanent, but enough to see them through. His father stepped outside first, scanning the horizon with steady eyes. "The high pass is gone to us," he murmured on returning. "Too deep, too treacherous. His voice carried no panic, only fact. They would not take the mountain trail. It had been spoken of for weeks as their safest route of escape, but now it was sealed. Another way would have to be chosen. The boy's mother nodded, already ladling hot tea made from pine needles into tin cups. The scent was sharp, clearing the lungs. She passed one cup to him, then one to each sibling, the steam rising like a fragile veil between them. "The valley, then," she said quietly. "The forest will cover us, though it slows the way." No one argued. Decisions were less about preference now and more about survival. Yet even as plans shifted, there was a calm acceptance. The Amish had always learned to bend rather than break, to yield to the shape of the land and the weight of circumstance. By midday, the caravan gathered. Families arrived one by one from their hidden shelters, sleds creaking over snow, horses snorting clouds into the air. Children clung to mothers' skirts, their eyes wide and silent. The boy caught sight of Margaret, walking beside her younger brother. She raised a hand in greeting, her face pale but composed. He remembered the cross she had pressed into his hand days earlier. It rested now in his pocket beside the small bird his own brother had carved. Bishop Yoda stood at the center of the group, his beard rimed with ice, his voice low but steady. "We move by the trees," he instructed, "not across the fields. Patrols ride the open ground. In the forest, we are slower but unseen." His words fell into the still air like stones into deep water, quiet ripples that reached every ear. The caravan shifted into motion. The boy and his family joined their place in the line, the sled runners hissing softly over the snow. The forest rose ahead, dark and thick, the trees standing shoulder to shoulder as though prepared to guard them. At first, the trail was easy enough. The snow lay deep but packed, and the trees cut the wind. The boy walked behind the sled, steadying its load when it leaned. His breath came in steady puffs, rising and fading. Around him, the forest seemed alive with whispers, the creak of branches, the distant call of a crow, the muffled rhythm of many feet moving together. But as the day stretched on, the path grew rougher. Fallen branches blocked the way. Drifts piled higher where the wind had swirled snow into hidden hollows. More than once, the sled tipped dangerously, and hands rushed in from all sides to right it. No one complained. The work was shared, each person stepping in as strength allowed. At one pause, the boy noticed Jakob trudging ahead, his shoulders hunched against the cold. The elder's son carried no sled, yet his burden was plain in the way he moved. The boy quickened, his steps to match him. "The beans were good," he said softly, recalling the gift delivered days before. Jakob glanced sideways, his expression softening for the first time in days. "And your cheese gave my mother strength," he replied. "One small thing keeps another alive." Their words were few, but they carried the weight of brotherhood. Late in the afternoon, snow began again, not in gentle flakes, but in thick sheets that blurred the trees into shadows. The wind found its way even into the forest, driving the storm sideways. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The caravan slowed to a crawl, each step measured, each sled pulled with care. Fear stirred at the edges of the boy's thoughts. What if they lost their way? What if the line broke apart, one family separated from the rest? He tightened his grip on the sled's side, grounding himself in the feel of wood and rope. Ahead, his father walked with steady steps, shoulders broad and unbending against the storm. The sight calmed him, reminding him that they were not alone. When at last Bishop Yoda signaled a halt, the relief was palpable. families clustered together beneath a thick stand of pines where the snow could not fall so heavily. Fires were forbidden. The light might betray them, but mothers unpacked bread and dried meat, passing it hand to hand. The boy chewed his portion slowly, tasting little but feeling strength return to his limbs. It was then that Margaret drew near, her shawl pulled tight. She held out a strip of cloth, neatly folded. "For your boots," she said softly. "I saw you walking stiff. Wrap this inside. It will keep you warmer." The boy accepted it, his cheeks warming despite the cold. "Thank you," he whispered. She nodded, her eyes lingering only a moment before she returned to her brother's side. Another gift, small yet steady, passed quietly in the storm. The caravan moved again as dusk pressed down. Lanterns were lit, shielded as best as possible, their glow falling in circles on the snow. The boy watched his breath mingle with the lantern smoke, rising briefly before disappearing into the night. Hours later, when at last they reached the chosen clearing for camp, exhaustion weighed heavier than any burden carried. Shelters were raised quickly from canvas and branches, children tucked inside against the cold. The boy worked until his fingers were numb, then finally sank beside his family. His father's voice carried the evening prayer, low and even. The boy listened with half-closed eyes, the words falling over him like a blanket. Gratitude for safe passage, for food enough, for the strength to continue tomorrow. The storm still raged beyond the trees, but within their small circle there was peace. Fragile, fleeting, yet enough. Stillness deepens while shadows linger along the road. The morning broke with a hush so complete it seemed the forest itself was holding its breath. A pale sun pushed weakly through a veil of clouds, casting long silver beams between the tall trunks. The snow, fallen heavy during the night, lay in folds and ridges, untouched save for the narrow line of tracks the caravan had pressed into it yesterday. Every sound, the creak of a sled, the snort of a horse, the crunch of boots, carried clearly, magnified by the silence. The boy walked beside his father at the front of their sled. His breath plumed in slow clouds, rising into the sharp air. The forest smelled of pine and cold earth, though each step released a faint musk of damp leather, wool, and sweat. Behind them stretched the rest of the families, a living line of perseverance winding deeper into the woods. Though they had slept beneath a canopy of trees that muffled the storm, no one truly rested. The weight of pursuit pressed into every dream, every pause. The boy remembered waking in the night, heart hammering, certain he had heard horses in the distance. Yet there had been nothing. Only the drip of snow sliding from branches, the groan of shifting ice. Still, the fear clung to him, a shadow that walked with them now. Bishop Yoda had gathered the men before departure. His voice, calm yet grave, had laid out the truth. The authorities were still near. Scouts reported fresh tracks on the lower roads. If they strayed from cover, they risked being seen. So they would stay among the trees, even if it meant slower progress. "We are not racing," the bishop had said. "We are enduring." The boy turned this phrase over in his mind as they moved. Not racing, but enduring. It matched the rhythm of their steps, steady and deliberate, no faster than the slowest could manage. He looked back at his siblings. Hans trudged with quiet determination, his jaw set. The younger ones clung to their mother's hands, their faces pale but watchful. None complained. They had all learned by now that words wasted energy, and energy could not be spared. By midday, the forest thinned, opening onto a slope where the valley could be seen below. From here, scattered farms dotted the snowfields, smoke curling gently from chimneys. It should have been a comforting sight, but instead unease rippled through the caravan. Those farms might hold allies, or they might hold men loyal to the authorities. Every plume of smoke could mark safety or betrayal. The bishop signaled a halt. Families crouched among the trees, sleds hidden beneath branches. Scouts crept forward to study the valley. The boy watched them go, admiring the silent skill with which they moved, their dark coats blending with shadow. Minutes stretched into an hour. Mothers hushed restless children, fathers whispered prayers, and the boy found his gaze fixed on a crow circling overhead. Its wings beat slow against the pale sky, a black fleck moving in calm rhythm, untouched by human fear. When the scouts returned, their faces told the story before words were spoken. Patrols were moving through the valley. Horses, armed men. They had stopped at a farmhouse, questioning its occupants. One scout had watched from the tree line as a family was dragged outside. Whether neighbors or strangers, the outcome was the same. The authorities demanded answers about the Amish refugees. The family's frightened gestures seemed to insist they knew nothing. Still, one of the men was struck across the face with a rifle butt. The bishop bowed his head, his eyes closing briefly as though in silent grief. Then he lifted his gaze, steady once more. "We stay to the shadows," he said. "No open fields. We keep the forest as our cloak." His voice carried calm resolve, but the boy felt the tension ripple through the group like wind through grass. The world beyond the trees had narrowed. Their road grew lonelier still. The caravan turned, pressing deeper into the woods. The path was uneven, cluttered with roots and stones hidden beneath snow. More than once, a sled tipped sharply, sending bundles tumbling into the drifts. Each time, hands appeared, neighbors rushing to lift, to gather, to set things right. No one left another to struggle alone. Even in shadows, they found strength in numbers. As the afternoon waned, the boy walked alongside Margaret again. Her cheeks were raw from the cold, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the trees. "Do you think they'll find us?" she asked quietly, not looking at him. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not if we stay together." It was not quite truth, not quite reassurance, but it was what his heart wanted to believe. She nodded, lips pressed tight, and they trudged on. The forest thickened as the light faded. Dusk came early beneath the canopy, shadows lengthening, branches creaking overhead. The boy felt the weight of every sound, the snap of a twig, the sigh of wind. Once, a hare darted across their path, vanishing into brush. Everyone froze, hearts thudding, until it was clear the noise had been nothing more. Fear had sharpened them, trained them to see threat in every flicker. When at last the order came to make camp, relief mingled with unease. Fires could not be lit. They would sleep cold again. Families spread canvas between trees, layering branches for cover. The boy's hands burned from handling rope and frozen wood, but he worked until his father clapped him on the shoulder. "Enough," the man said. "You've done well." The praise warmed him more than any fire could. As night deepened, they ate their bread and dried meat in silence. The taste was bland, but hunger softened judgment. Children huddled close, mothers sang low to soothe them. From somewhere down the line, a hymn began, soft, slow, carried more in breath than in voice. Others joined, until the camp murmured with harmony like a distant river. No one sang loudly. It was worship cloaked in caution, but it steadied weary hearts. The boy lay back against his bundled cloak, watching the sky through a gap in branches. Stars pricked through the cloud veil, sharp and cold. He thought of the crow again, circling unbothered above the valley. The bird had no fear of patrols, no concern for persecution. It lived by its own rules, its place written only in the sky. A small envy stirred in him, but also hope. If such fragile creatures could endure, so could they. Sleep came slowly, tangled with worry, but finally it wrapped around him like the forest itself, dark, vast, and sheltering. Tomorrow would bring more shadows, more roads unseen, but for now, endurance was enough. Quiet marks in snow speak more clearly than voices. Dawn came pale and deliberate, drawing a thin line of pearl along the far ridge. The forest, which had guarded their sleep with its dark boughs, released them slowly, as if reluctant to give them back to the day. The boy woke to the small sounds that meant safety for the moment. Canvas shifting, rope untied, a mother murmuring to a child, the patient snort of a horse testing the cold. He lay still for a breath longer, feeling the weight of the blanket and the soft, shared warmth the family had hoarded through the night. Then he sat up, listened, and took stock the way his father had taught him. Heart, hands, weather, and the look of the trees. No fire meant stiff fingers, but their breath made small ghosts in the air, and the ghosts dissolved, and there was something oddly comforting in that little cycle. He pulled on his boots and stepped out from under the canvas. The world had not brightened much. The sky held to its winter gray, but the snow kept its own light, and it was enough to see by. He squinted at the path they had made, the long white curve along the forest floor. Then he looked beyond to the open slope they had decided not to cross. The wind had moved quietly in the night, combing the open snow into gentle ribs. There, in that even field, anything that disturbed the pattern would speak. The boy felt, rather than heard, his father come to stand beside him. They did not greet each other. The hour did not require ceremony. The man's hand rested briefly at the boy's shoulder, then fell away. He pointed with his chin rather than his hand, the way men do when they want to leave the scene undisturbed. At the far margin of the slope, where the forest softened toward the valley, a darker seam interrupted the wind's combing. It did not repeat the honest rhythm of a hare's long leaps. It did not stitch the short, urgent footprints of a fox. It ran in a pressed, deliberate line, parallel to the edge of the trees, then veered and circled back upon itself, and there were longer, heavier ovals stamped at intervals. Hooves. The boy's stomach gave a slow turn, like a wheel catching on a stone. So it was true. Patrols had ranged along the open, hunting for the kind of mistake that daylight coaxes from the tired. He felt heat rise under his scarf, not from anger, but from the body's old answer to danger. Blood readying muscles, breath preparing itself to shorten if it must. He took another breath, counted to 4 the way his mother had once taught him to do, when a fever ran high, and the heat folded back into steadiness. He was not alone. Bishop Yoda moved along the line of families, his steps modest, his voice pitched low. He stopped by each sled, each canvas shelter, and spoke the same small sentence in the same even tone, as if pressing wax onto the seal of a letter. In the forest, 1 mark means pause, 2 means go back, 3 means gather. He raised a hand in the air and opened and closed it slowly, 3 times to show the shape of the 3rd mark. We set them with a stick across the path, shallow enough to be erased by a branch. No words, no singing today. The boy watched the bishop's face as he made his way down the line. Snow had whitened the old man's beard, and the skin about his eyes was reddened by cold and a lack of sleep. But his gaze was clear, and a quiet firmness lived in it, the kind that calms children and settles men. The boy thought of what Margaret had said days earlier. that courage might sound like a latch lifting at the right moment. Here was another kind, the kind that sounds like instruction spoken once, and rightly, and obeyed without conversation. They ate without ceremony. A thin slice of bread softened with snow melted on the tongue, a bit of dried apple to remind the mouth of warmer seasons. A child whimpered with the ache of cold fingers, and a mother tucked both small hands inside her own coat and breathed upon them until the whimper thinned to a sigh. The boy tightened the strap on his boot, tested the rope at the sled's bow, and gave the chest, now fitted with the blacksmith's hinge, a light tap with 2 fingers, as if reassuring a watchful animal. They moved at first without any path at all, spreading themselves thin like a line of cautious deer, then finding again the faint impression of yesterday's runners and footprints, muffled by the night's sifting of snow. The forest helped them. Pines drew their branches low, and spruce stood like tall, courteous men, close-shouldered, making a corridor dim and private. The caravan flowed along that corridor as water finds the lower seam between stones. No one spoke above a breath. Children learned to point rather than call out when a particular tree looked like a man or a stump like a bear. The youngest rode where they must, faces half hidden in shawls, eyes wide with the effort of watching everything and understanding only the simplest rule: hold fast. Mid-morning, a mark lay across the track, a single shallow line made by a stick dragged flat across the snow. The boy's father raised his palm, and the movement traveled backward like a ripple on a still pond. Pause. Nothing moved, and then everything moved. Hearts shortening their beats, breaths lifting and thinning, eyes widening their work while muscles went quiet. The boy leaned slightly, only slightly, into the sled's load with his hip, so the runners would sit more honestly, in their groove and not creak. In the stillness, the forest's smallest messages came forward. A cone dropping somewhere, a bird shifting its feet on a branch, the faint tremble of snow thinking about falling. Then, from the slant of the valley below, a sound that did not belong. Metal upon metal, distant but clean, the tone a horseshoe makes on a buried stone. One, another, silence again, and then the long, low murmur of men speaking in a way that expects an answer. The boy felt the old human part of him want to look, to pull the forest aside and see the shape of what he feared, to measure it with his eyes. He did not. He watched his father's jaw instead. The man did not clench. He did not swallow. He merely let the hand he had raised drop to his side and very slowly brought one finger to touch the breast of his coat, just where, beneath wool and linen, the little pouch lay with the family's record. The gesture was so small the trees themselves would not have noticed, and yet it was a sentence. We are still ourselves. The sound drifted away. No shout came, no separate clatter of a rider breaking from line. Somewhere, men finished their question, received the answer they wanted, or no answer at all, and moved on. The boy turned back toward the sled in time to see Margaret a few places behind, her face lifted slightly toward the pale sky. Their eyes met for perhaps the length of a blink. Her gaze said, "I heard it." His answered, "I know." Between them, no fear transferred, only recognition. The line began again, a soft, resuming motion, as if someone had pressed a fingertip to a spinning plate to steady it, then taken the finger away. They made their first mark before noon, 2 shallow lines on the path ahead, leaning like paired twigs set by the same hand. Go back. The scouts had found a fallen hemlock, wide as a cart, its trunk laid across their way like a low wall. In other seasons, with men free to shout and laugh, they might have heaved as one and set it to the side. Today, the risk of sound and the cost of time lost to struggling with frozen wood wrote a different answer. The line turned neatly upon itself, a school of fish changing direction by the one thought taught to the many. The boy helped his father lift the sled's bow a hand's breadth to find the new groove and felt, in the small cooperation of that shared lift, a gratitude that surprised him. How light, heavy things become when everyone shares the corner nearest to him. The detour took them into older trees where the ground fell away in slow, patient steps. Here the snow had drifted in long, soft tables between roots, and the runners sighed through it as through flour. The light was different, greener even under winter's gray, as if last summer still lived somewhere inside the needles. Bird spoke again. He heard the short, chipping call of a titmouse and the run of a nuthatch down a trunk, head first, as if the world could be trusted enough to be turned upside down. His shoulders dropped a measure from his ears. Near midday, Bishop Yoda called for the smallest rest a day like this allows, a kneeling to examine a binding, a sharing of a slice, a cup of snow scooped and held until it melted into the mouth. The boy's mother produced, from a pocket he could never find when he looked for it, a thimbleful of honey in a twist of paper. She touched a tiny dab to each child's tongue. It lit their faces more than warmed their bodies. Summer made visible for a second, then swallowed. The boy would remember that brightness later, the way a man remembers a friend's candle seen briefly through a window when the road is still long. Then the second signal appeared. 3 marks across the snow, shallow, decisive. Gather. The men at the front stopped short and waved the rest in, drawing the caravan into a thicket where saplings had sprung up close as cousins and hidden the open sky. No one asked why. The forest knew first. A bird went cross, then back. Far off, something rapped and rapped again, not like a woodpecker and not like a hammer, more metallic, as if the world had found a small bell to ring and was trying out where to hang it. Bishop Yoda lifted his hand, palm out. He didn't need to speak, but he did, because sometimes the human voice, even quiet, is part of making courage real. We wait. We make ourselves small. We ask only for the breath it takes to keep another step when it is time. The prayer had no "Dear Lord" in it, no amen. It sat between instruction and worship, and everyone understood it. Minutes lengthened like shadow, then folded back into seconds as the sound below moved past and away. No horse clattered up the slope. No man called for torches. Somewhere, in a language that did not care for their dialect, orders were given, received, forgotten. The boy realized he had been holding his hand around the pocket where his brother's carved bird lived. He loosened his grip and felt the edges of the rough little wings. The pocket was warm. The bird was not elegant, but it had the right shape, which is another form of truth. When they started again, it was with the same slow insistence. The land ahead softened, then tipped gently down. The trees opened to an old cart trace, 2 subtle hollows traveling side by side, the memory of wheels in earth written so many times the soil could not forget. Snow had copied the sentence. The boy's father tested the edges with the toe of his boot, pressing, considering the weight, then nodded. "Here," he said, "but take it the way you would enter a church, straight and without show." They moved into the trace, 2 families at a time, then 3, then the rest. The runners liked the old grooves, the way feet prefer familiar shoes, and the motion eased. A relief traveled the line that did not become carelessness. It only made backs unbend a half inch and eyes soften at the corners. Even the horses let out long breath, pillars of white that lifted like tents and vanished. The boy walked, and for a few minutes thought of other things. His mother's garden in July, the sound a scythe makes, how a field smells when the first rain chooses it. What small mercy it is to remember heat in the middle of cold. Late light found them in a narrow fold of land where cedar and spruce shouldered together like old friends, shutting out the wind. The scout at the head set 3 lines in the snow again. Gather, and the thicket received them as if it had been waiting all afternoon to do this one good deed. Canvas rose in slanted walls. Children were tucked like letters into envelopes. The boy's father set the sled against a trunk at such an angle that its weight would help them, not fight them, should they need to go quickly. He took the axe from its place and laid it down where a reaching hand in darkness could not miss it. The boy knew the location by heart. In a winter like this, knowing where things are is a kind of money. There were no songs that evening, no long prayers. The bishop said only the shortest blessing, for bread enough and the way thither. They ate that bread, and a heel of cheese, and a few pieces of dried apple that tasted like a memory does, less than the thing itself, but sweet for being carried so far. The boy rubbed his sister's fingers between his palms until their sting receded and she could sleep. He heard Margaret's brother stifle a cough 3 shelters down, and someone, perhaps Margaret, perhaps her mother, set a hand to his back and rubbed slow circles that would not wake the nearest neighbor. Kindness, too, can be made light enough to carry without notice. His father reached into his coat then, pressed the small leather pouch into the boy's hand, and left it there. The boy stared at it, then at him. The fireless dark made the man's face an outline only, the line of nose and cheek, the hat brim like a small roof. "Keep it tonight," the father said softly, "and keep it without bravery. If a thing is to be carried, it ought to be carried by 2 in turn." The boy swallowed. The weight was not heavy. It felt, in fact, less substantial than the bird, but it rearranged the furniture of his chest, made a new doorway, where before there had been only a wall. "Yes," he said. It came out as breath more than speech. He tucked the pouch inside his shirt, next to skin, where it could feel the truth of his heartbeat. He lay down then, and watched the small wedge of sky the thicket allowed them. Stars were thin tonight, but one, just one, looked clear as a bead at the end of a string, and for a while he followed the imagined chord of it upward, if upward can be found in a sky that seems to have no floor and no ceiling. He did not ask for anything. He did not bargain. He let gratitude slide over the day like a blanket pulled up to the chin. Not saved, exactly. Not yet, but not lost. Sometime in the deep hours, wind rose and laid snow like a careful hand over the long scar of their path. Morning scouts would find a clean sheet where last night's page had ended. Signals erased themselves. Even fear, taught to read those marks, would fail to sound out their story. The boy slept and dreamt, if that quiet drift can be named a dream, of a table set with ordinary spoons and a towel on the peg where it belonged, and of a door latch that lifted not in alarm, but because a friend had come by with news about the weather and a question about seed. Near the valley, silence carries more weight than speech. The sun had not yet crested the ridge when the first stirrings began. A hand brushing snow from a canvas roof, the quiet thud of boots packed with straw set down in readiness, a cough muffled in a sleeve. The boy woke to all of it, his eyes opening to a dim gray sky that hinted at daylight, but withheld its warmth. His breath curled above him in little wisps, proof that the air inside their shelter was only a degree kinder than the bitter cold outside. He sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the younger ones who had pressed close during the night. Their faces, framed by scarves and blankets, looked peaceful in sleep. He envied them that rest. For him, dreams had been full of anxious fragments, the snap of a twig mistaken for pursuit, the shimmer of lanterns just beyond the trees, the sensation of running without ever finding a safe place to stop. Yet with morning came duty, and duty steadied the heart. His father crouched at the entrance, peering out. When their eyes met, no words passed. The father simply nodded toward the boy's boots, a signal to ready himself. The boy obeyed, lacing stiff leather with fingers that burned from cold. By now he knew the rhythm: rise without fuss, eat without noise, move without delay. Each day felt like a continuation of the one before, yet each day also carried the silent weight of new danger. The valley lay ahead. That was the word whispered last night by Bishop Yoda when he moved through the camp. Tomorrow we reach the edge. The valley meant farms, roads, perhaps safety. It also meant patrols. To step out from under the trees would be to risk being seen. Every family understood. Children sensed it too. They clutched toys and tokens closer, their eyes older than their years. Breakfast was meager. Dry bread softened with snow passed hand to hand. A mother tore her piece into 3, giving 2 to her little ones, keeping only a sliver for herself. The boy watched, and his stomach tightened, not only with hunger, but with the ache of seeing sacrifice worn so naturally, as if it were an old garment. His mother, too, divided her share quietly. He wanted to protest, to insist she eat more, but he bit the words back. Protest was wasted. Gratitude was the answer. He finished what little he had and met her gaze, letting his eyes say what his mouth could not. Thank you. By mid-morning, the caravan began to move. Snow squeaked under boots, sleds creaked in rhythm, horses exhaled steam into the cold. The boy walked beside his family's sled, one hand steadying the chest that carried their papers, their small hoard of dried food, his father's tools. It felt sometimes as though the chest held not possessions, but the entire weight of their identity, proof they existed, evidence they had lived a life before this wandering. The forest thinned as they descended. Pines gave way to bare-limbed maples, their branches etched black against the winter sky. The ground sloped downward, and through gaps in the trees the boy caught glimpses of open land below. White fields stretched wide, broken here and there by barns and homesteads. Chimney smoke rose in faint threads. It should have been a picture of peace, yet tension spread through the caravan. The open valley looked beautiful, but also dangerous, like a stage on which they would be forced to play their part under watchful eyes. Scouts moved ahead, their figures blending with shadow. At times they returned, reporting in low voices, a road clear, a barn door swinging open, no riders seen. Other times they gave only a gesture, 2 fingers raised or a hand circling, signals agreed upon long before. The boy marveled at the silent choreography, this dance of caution that allowed them to move as one without ever lifting their voices. Near midday, the caravan paused in a hollow where the trees still stood thick. Families huddled together, resting only briefly. The boy's younger sister shivered violently, her teeth chattering. Without hesitation, he wrapped his scarf around her shoulders, tucking it tight beneath her chin. She looked up at him, eyes wide, and whispered, "But you'll be cold." He shook his head, managing a smile. "Not if you're warm." That was all. She leaned against him, and the trembling eased. Margaret approached then, her shawl pulled close, her face pale but resolute. She carried a small bundle in her hands, a pair of mittens, roughly knit but strong. "My mother made these last night," she said softly, offering them. "They're too small for my brother now. You should take them." The boy hesitated, his pride caught for a moment. Then he accepted, sliding them over his red, raw fingers. Warmth spread quickly, not only from the wool, but from the kindness behind it. "Tell her thank you," he murmured. Margaret nodded, her eyes lingering a heartbeat longer before she turned back to her family. The march resumed. The trail wound lower, bending toward the valley floor. Every sound seemed sharper now. A raven called overhead, its cry startling in the still air. A branch cracked under the weight of snow, making several children jump. Once, the faint rhythm of hooves echoed from the distance, sending a shiver of fear through the group. They froze until the sound faded, then moved again, slower than before. As afternoon waned, the bishop raised his hand, signaling a halt. Before them lay the final line of trees, beyond which stretched open fields dusted with snow. The boy's heart quickened. The valley lay just there, close enough to touch. Yet the danger of stepping out into the open held them back. Families clustered close, waiting for instruction. The bishop moved among them, his voice low but steady. "We go in small groups," he said, "one family at a time, led by those who know the land. Do not linger. Do not speak. Walk as if you belong." His words settled into the group like stones dropped into a still pond, each ripple widening into the hearts of those who listened. The boy's father turned to him then. "Stay close," he said. His voice was firm, but his eyes softened with quiet pride. The boy nodded, tightening his grip on the sled. He knew what was required. He was ready. They would wait for their turn, watching as the first families slipped from the shelter of the trees into the valley's white expanse. Each step forward marked not just progress, but defiance, a silent declaration that they would not vanish quietly. The boy drew in a slow breath, steadying himself. Soon it would be their turn to walk into the open, where shadows no longer shielded them, and trust would be their only cloak. Work resumes, warmth returning as rhythm steadies. The valley lay before them like a pale sheet spread wide, broken only by fences, barns, and the slow rising smoke of farms that seemed ordinary, untouched. Yet for the caravan hidden at the tree line, every detail glimmered with risk. The boy stood close to his father, feeling the rough fabric of his coat brush against his arm, hearing the measured breaths that carried steadiness into him. Their turn came sooner than expected. Bishop Yoda gave a small nod, and the boy's father gripped the sled rope. With one slow step, then another, they left the safety of the trees. The snowfield greeted them with silence, save for the faint squeak under boots and the occasional groan of the sled's runners. Behind, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Ahead, the wide openness felt like a stage where any wrong move could draw attention. The boy kept his gaze forward. He had been told, "Walk as though you belong." Yet his ears strained for any sound, hoofbeats, shouts, the clatter of weapons that would betray discovery. None came. Only the caw of a crow lifting from a fence post, the sigh of wind across the frozen meadow. They crossed one field, then another. His younger siblings trudged beside him, their small legs struggling but determined. When his sister stumbled, he steadied her with a hand, whispering, "Almost there." She nodded, breath puffing like smoke, eyes wide with the seriousness of the moment. At the far edge, hedgerows offered partial cover. The family slipped behind them, crouching low. From this vantage, The boy could see other families making the same passage. Some moved steadily, others faltered, pausing too long in the open. Each step carried the weight of centuries. Faith lived under threat, pressed but not broken. By late afternoon, the scattered groups converged at a narrow lane. Its frozen ruts bore the marks of many carts, yet none fresh enough to betray recent patrols. The lane wound between low hills, their slopes dotted with bare trees and stubbled fields. Relief whispered through the caravan. Here was a road that promised progress, though not safety. The bishop raised his hand. "We walk as workers returning from fields," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried gravity. If spoken to, answer simply. Do not linger. So they walked. A line of families, carts creaking, children bundled under blankets, adults steady as though this were the most ordinary of journeys. The boy studied the details to help with the illusion. The way his father held the rope as if pulling firewood, the way his mother adjusted her bonnet like any farm wife, the way Margaret walked beside her family, a basket looped over her arm though it carried only rags. They looked like villagers on an errand. The truth lay hidden in plain sight. An hour passed before the first test came. A farmer approached from the opposite direction, leading 2 oxen. He squinted at the line, then tipped his hat without slowing. "Evening," he said in the local dialect. The bishop returned the greeting, his accent careful, unremarkable. The farmer moved on, the oxen plodding. Breath released quietly among the group, the shared relief palpable though unspoken. But not all encounters would be so simple. Near dusk, the road curved toward a small hamlet. Smoke rose from chimneys, and faint voices drifted from a tavern. The caravan slowed, uncertainty rippling. To skirt the hamlet meant trudging through deeper snow. To pass through meant exposure. After a hushed council, the bishop chose the latter. "Keep moving," he said. "Do not stop." The boy's heart hammered as they entered the village. A dog barked, running alongside the sled until a man called it back. Windows glowed with lamplight, shadows moving within. A child pointed from a doorway, then was pulled inside. The boy kept his eyes low, but he felt the weight of unseen gazes. Yet no one stepped forward to question. No patrol emerged. By the time they cleared the last house, relief swept the caravan like a breeze. That night they found shelter in a shallow hollow beyond the hamlet. Snow had drifted deep against one side, providing a natural wall. Families arranged their carts to form a circle, spreading canvas overhead where possible. Fires were lit low, smoke filtered through branches to hide their glow. Supper was plain, bread softened in hot water, a handful of dried apples divided among children. But the warmth of fire, however meager, wrapped around them like a blessing. The boy sat near his father, holding a piece of wood across his knees. With his small knife, he carved slowly, shaving curls that fell like pale ribbons. His sister watched. "What will it be?" she asked. "A bird," he said, "to remind us we are not bound forever." She smiled faintly, the first time all day. The unfinished figure, rough and simple, carried more comfort than food could. Later, as darkness deepened, Bishop Yoda moved among the fires. He offered verses in a quiet tone, words of endurance and promise. "The Lord is our refuge, a stronghold in times of trouble." Families bowed their heads, murmuring amens too soft for ears beyond the circle. Even the children, restless from the day, fell into calm at the rhythm of prayer. The boy lay down with his siblings close, straw beneath, canvas above, the fire's glow flickering. His body ached, his feet numb despite the mittens Margaret had given. Yet within the ache, peace crept. A fragile peace, but real. The valley had been crossed. They had not been discovered. Tomorrow would bring more trials, but tonight they rested with their community intact. Shelter is shared, turning night into something gentler. The road bent once more into low hills, and there, tucked into the crook of a valley, stood a barn, broad roof sagging under the weight of snow, its timber walls leaning with age, but still standing strong. To the weary eyes of the caravan, it seemed almost holy. After days of wind biting at faces, nights pressed down by cold forests, here was a structure that promised rest beneath a roof, 4 walls to shield the night. Brother Martin had spoken of it, this abandoned farmstead, long empty but still sound. When the first families reached it, they paused, unsure if the creak of timbers signaled welcome or warning. But the bishop raised his hand. "This will do," he said softly. Relief spread like warmth through the group. The doors protested as they swung wide, hinges groaning in the silence. Inside, the air smelled of hay, long since dried, of dust, of wood that had held decades of winters. Rays of the fading sun pierced gaps in the planks, falling like golden ladders across the floor. Children entered first, wide-eyed, fingers tracing the smooth, worn boards as though touching a relic. Adults followed, carrying bundles, their movements careful, reverent even, as though afraid too much noise might awaken old memories embedded in the barn's beams. Soon, order took shape. Families marked corners with blankets or baskets, setting small spaces for themselves. The bishop directed carts into a loose circle just outside, animals tethered where the wind would trouble them least. Fires were lit in pits dug swiftly by practiced hands, their smoke vented through gaps in the roof. Before long, the barn glowed with a dim, shared light, shadows dancing along rafters. The boy and his brother spread straw across their family's chosen corner. The familiar crunch beneath their hands, the smell of earth and fiber, carried him back to nights on their own farm. It wasn't comfort, not exactly, but it was something close, something that gave his body permission to loosen. His mother laid out their few blankets, patting them smooth. "It will be enough," she whispered, and somehow it was. The evening meal came together slowly, drawn from many hands. One family shared dried beans, another cut strips of smoked meat. Flour from a sack became thick paste baked on flat stones near the fire. Together it formed a stew, humble, uneven, yet filling. Children passed bowls with solemn care, as though they held treasure, and in truth, they did. Each mouthful tasted of survival, of community woven stronger with every bite. After the meal, Bishop Yoda stood, his frame tall but stooped with years. His voice, though soft, carried across the barn. "We are not gathered here in plenty, but in provision. We are not in freedom, but in fellowship. And that, children, is enough for tonight." Heads bowed, words of prayer rising like smoke, mingling with the warmth of the fires. Then came something unexpected. Song. It began with one of the older women, her voice cracked but steady, humming an old tune. Another joined, then another, until voices layered gently, weaving harmonies that had crossed centuries. No instruments, only the pure human sound, deep and slow, filling the barn with notes that hung in the air long after the lips had closed. The boy listened, his chest rising with each phrase, his eyes prickling with tears he hadn't expected. The song wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to carry. It was meant to wrap, like a blanket pulled close, reminding each heart that they belonged not only to their families but to something larger, an unbroken chain stretching backward and forward, unshaken by walls or governments or winter. He glanced at Margaret across the fire. She sat close to her younger siblings, her eyes closed, lips moving with the song. In her hands, she held the small cross she had pressed into his palm days earlier. She didn't look afraid now. She looked rooted, as if nothing could uproot what lived inside her. When the song ended, silence settled with equal power. Only the pop of firewood and the soft shifting of straw broke it. Then stories began, quiet voices telling of past flights, of narrow escapes, of kindnesses offered by strangers when hope seemed gone. Elders recalled names long past, martyrs whose blood had watered the ground of faith. Children leaned forward, wide-eyed, catching each word as though gathering seeds to plant within themselves. The boy's father told of his grandfather, how he once hid a family beneath floorboards while soldiers searched the house above. They never found them, he said, eyes reflecting the fire. And because of that, their children live today. His hand rested on the boy's shoulder, heavy with both pride and warning. Remember, faith is not lived alone. It is carried together. Night deepened, but no one hurried to sleep. There was safety in this space, fragile but precious. Families lingered, talking in murmurs, mending clothes by firelight, sharing remedies for coughs, passing around a pouch of herbs to soothe aching joints. The barn became a living organism, each person a cell in something greater, warmth flowing like blood from one corner to another. When at last the bishop urged rest, families withdrew into their corners, children curled under blankets, parents keeping watch a while longer. The boy lay between his brother and sister, staring up at the rafters. He could see stars through the cracks, distant, cold, but steady. Above him, the universe stretched vast and silent. Yet here in this old barn was a world of its own, small but alive, flickering with breath and trust. As his eyes grew heavy, he heard his mother humming the lullaby again, the same tune she had sung on nights when storms rattled their farmhouse windows. The melody wrapped him now as it had then, though the walls were not their own, though tomorrow's path was uncertain. He thought of the carving he had made earlier, the bird unfinished in his pocket. Perhaps he would finish it tomorrow, a gift for his sister to remind her that wings always wait, even when ground is cold. Sleep came slow but sure, carrying him down like straw pressing against his back. The barn creaked with the weight of snow, but held fast. Fires dimmed, voices hushed, and at last the only sounds were breathing. Dozens of lungs moving as one, proof that they had made it through another day. Firelight carries stories older than any present trial. The barn, though still hushed from the singing, had not yet surrendered to full sleep. Fires burned lower, but their embers glowed hot, casting long shadows across the beams. In that wavering glow, stories began to flow, passed from elder to youth, as natural as breath. It was not planned, not commanded. Someone would speak, another would respond. And before long, the entire community had drifted into a circle of memory and teaching. The bishop nodded to one of the oldest men, Brother Albrecht, his beard white as new snow. "Tell them of Zurich," the bishop said gently. And so the man leaned forward, his voice thin yet firm, recounting how in 1527, Felix Mans was drowned in the Limit River for insisting that baptism belonged to adults who could confess their faith, not to infants who could not choose. The boy shivered at the thought, not from cold, but from the weight of it. To be held under water by men of authority, to die with lungs burning, for the simple belief that faith required choice. This was not the kind of danger that lurked at the edges of their barns and fields. This was a danger that sought to smother conviction itself. Yet Brother Albrecht told the story not with terror, but with a calm dignity, as though Felix's death had planted seeds that now bore fruit in their gathering tonight. Another voice rose, an older woman, her hands still busy with stitching a tear in a child's coat. She spoke of Dirk Willems, the Dutch Anabaptist who, fleeing across frozen canals, turned back when his pursuer fell through the ice. He pulled the man to safety, only to be captured and burned for his faith. Children leaned closer, their eyes wide, waiting for a moment of rescue that never came. Instead, they received something harder, the lesson that kindness sometimes leads not to safety, but to sacrifice. And yet, that story was told with pride, as though Dirk's decision revealed the truest shape of mercy. The fire popped, sparks drifting upward like tiny stars. The boy thought of the stars beyond the roof beams, and how both those lights and these flames told stories of endurance. Each ember was like a life, glowing bright, fading, then passing its heat to the next piece of wood until the fire itself became a chain of countless sparks, none alone, each contributing. Margaret's mother spoke next, her voice steady, though her eyes glistened. She told of the journey her family once made when she was a child, fleeing Alsace under threat of soldiers. "We carried nothing but our bread," she said, her hands still busy plaiting dough for the next morning. "But we carried hymns in our hearts, and those hymns were enough." The younger children tilted their heads, trying to imagine lives reduced to so little, yet held together by song. As stories flowed, the boy's own father began to speak. He did not tell of martyrs or escapes, but of a different kind of endurance. How his grandfather once rebuilt a home after it was burned. He gathered stones with his own children, father said. Each day they carried them up from the riverbed. The wall rose slowly, but each stone was placed with prayer. That house stood longer than the men who built it. The boy pictured the wall, stone upon stone, each prayer sealing it. He wondered if tomorrow they too would be asked to build again, walls that would outlast their hands. The fire dimmed, shadows lengthened, and yet the circle held. There was no rush, no one pressing for sleep. For in those hours, under flickering light, time seemed suspended. Hardship was real, yes. The cold still gnawed, hunger still pressed. But in stories, there was warmth no fire could give. The bishop finally spoke again, his voice low and grave. "Children, these stories are not to frighten you. They are to prepare you. What you endure is not new. What you face has been faced before, and always faith has remained. That is our inheritance. That is what no authority can take." A silence followed, heavier than before. Then, in that quiet, one of the smallest children asked, "Will they come for us too?" The question hung, piercing. Parents shifted uneasily, but it was the bishop who answered. He bent low, his lined face catching firelight. "Perhaps," he said softly, "but if they do, we will face it together. And together, God's hand will hold us." The boy felt both fear and peace mingle inside him, as though the stories were a quilt with threads of dread and threads of comfort woven side by side. He looked around at the circle. Faces weathered, faces young, all leaning into the same flame, all tied by the same faith. Gradually, families pulled back into their corners, fires tended low. Yet even as people lay down on straw beds, the stories lingered in the air like smoke, curling upward to settle into rafters where they would remain, unseen, but felt. The boy curled beside his siblings, his father's words still echoing, walls of stone built by prayer, hymns carried when bread was gone, mercy chosen even when it cost everything. He pressed his hand to the small cross Margaret had given him, its wooden edges warm from his palm. He felt, somehow, that he was part of the same chain, that one day his choices, too, might become a story told by firelight. Companions speak softly, sharing fears without disguise. The barn had fallen into a deep hush after the elders' stories, yet sleep did not come for everyone. Straw rustled softly as families shifted, seeking comfort on beds that could never quite soften the ache of weary bones. Somewhere in the shadows, a baby fussed and was quickly soothed by a mother's whisper. A horse outside stamped its hooves in the snow, the muffled sound seeping through the wooden boards. The boy lay still, his eyes half closed, though his mind stirred restlessly. The firelight had dimmed to embers, but the stories lingered like smoke inside his chest. He thought of Felix Mann's beneath the river, of Dirk Willems turning back on the ice, of his father's grandfather stacking stones one prayer at a time. They were not fairy tales told to ease children into sleep. They were true, heavy, and near. Tomorrow, he knew, the authorities might knock at their door, and the names of his own family could be added to the chain of remembered trials. A shifting sound drew his attention. Across the barn, Margaret stirred. She sat upright, arms wrapped around her knees, her silhouette outlined by the faint red glow of the hearth. The boy hesitated, then pushed himself quietly to his feet, careful not to wake his siblings. He crossed the straw-littered floor, each step slow, until he reached her side. "Can't sleep either?" he asked in a whisper. She shook her head. "The stories, they stay in my mind. I keep hearing them again, like voices that won't let me rest." He lowered himself to sit beside her, their shoulders not touching, but near. The cold pressed in from the walls, but the nearness of another soul eased the chill in its own way. For a while, they said nothing, listening to the quiet chorus of sleeping families. Deep breaths, faint snores, the occasional cough muffled in the darkness. At last, Margaret spoke again. "I keep thinking of my father," she admitted. Her voice caught slightly. "He was taken with the others. Do you think he's warm? Do you think they give him bread? Or do you think—" She stopped, unable to finish. The boy wanted to offer comfort, but the truth was brittle. He had no answers, only the same questions that gnawed at her. Instead, he said, "My father says we don't always get to know. We can only trust that God sees what we cannot." She gave a small, weary laugh, without mirth. Trust. It sounds so easy when he says it, but in the night, when everything is dark, it feels harder than anything. The boy nodded. "I know. Sometimes it feels like faith is just holding still, even when you're afraid." They lapsed into silence again, both gazing at the glowing embers. Margaret pulled something from her pocket. In the dim light, the boy saw it was a small wooden cross, worn smooth from handling. She pressed it into his palm. "My father carved this," she said. "I have another. When we see each other again, we'll both know we carried the same piece of him." The boy curled his fingers around it, feeling the grooves and warmth of the wood. "I'll keep it safe," he promised. For the first time that night, her shoulders relaxed slightly. The shared burden between them lightened, if only by a small measure. A long moment passed. Outside, the wind had stilled. Snow slid softly from the roof with a sigh. The world seemed to be listening with them. "You know," the boy said finally, "sometimes I think the hardest part isn't hunger or cold. It's not knowing what will happen tomorrow, not knowing if we'll stay together or be torn apart. Margaret rested her chin on her knees. "Maybe that's why we tell stories," she whispered. "So that even when everything else is uncertain, we remember who we are." He thought about that. The firelight circle, the voices rising one by one. Each story had been both anchor and lantern, reminding them that they were not the first, nor would they be the last. Gradually, words faded and quiet settled over them once more. They sat side by side until their heads drooped and their bodies swayed with exhaustion. At last, they stretched out on the straw, a little apart, yet joined by the shared silence, the cross still pressed between his fingers. The barn breathed steadily around them, dozens of hearts beating, dozens of souls dreaming, all woven together in one fragile, faithful tapestry. Snow veils the trail, both blessing and burden. Morning broke without fanfare, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise upon a world so heavily wrapped in white. The boy stirred beneath a blanket stiff with cold and damp, his breath pluming in the still air. Around him, the barn groaned faintly as timbers contracted in the frost, the sound like an old man's sigh. He sat up slowly, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and found his little sister curled against him, her hand still clutching the wooden lamb their father had carved. When he stepped outside, the snow greeted him with blinding brightness. It had fallen thick through the night, erasing paths and covering roofs in a smooth, merciless quilt. Every track of their arrival had been swallowed, every footprint gone. The boy marveled at the silence, the way snow muffled sound until even the horses seemed to walk in whispers. His father was already there, stooped over the family's cart, examining the makeshift runners they had lashed to its frame the day before. "The snow will slow us," he murmured without looking up, "but it also hides us." He brushed frost from the leather straps and straightened. A mixed blessing. The boy understood. The very thing that would exhaust their strength might also shield them from watchful eyes. Such was the rhythm of their life. Nothing purely good, nothing purely bad, only what must be endured with patience. Bishop Yoda soon gathered the men at the barn's entrance. His breath smoked in the air, his beard lined with ice. "The high pass is lost to us now," he announced quietly. "We must take the valley. The snow will cover our trail, but the patrols know the valleys well. We must keep to the forest edges. God willing, it will be enough." Heads bowed in acceptance. There was no argument, no debate. Among these people, consensus came like the settling of snow, quiet, sure, inevitable. Breakfast was plain but warming, porridge thin as gruel, softened by a drizzle of honey saved for the children. Mothers pressed bowls into small hands, brushing hair from chilled faces, murmuring encouragements. Fathers tightened harnesses and checked the hooves of weary horses. Even the youngest children were given tasks, carrying kindling, fetching water, helping fold blankets. Busy hands left little room for fear. The boy's younger brother Hans trudged beside him, arms filled with bundles of straw for bedding. "Do you think the snow will stop them from finding us?" he asked. The boy adjusted his own load and glanced at the unbroken whiteness stretching in all directions. "For a while," he said, "but we can't count on it forever." By mid-morning, the caravan had formed once more, carts creaking as they slid onto the pale road. The horses strained, muscles trembling under layers of frost, their breaths coming in steady clouds. Progress was slow. Each step seemed to demand twice the strength, and yet the snow held them safely invisible from prying eyes. The boy felt the weight of his youngest sister clamber onto his back when her legs gave out. She whispered a tired thank you against his ear, her cheek ice cold. but her trust absolute. He carried her through the drifts, step after labored step, reminding himself that this was family, that each strong shoulder bore more than its own share so the whole might endure. The path narrowed as they pressed into the trees. Branches, heavy with snow, bent low like silent witnesses. Occasionally, a clump of ice fell with a muffled thud, startling the horses. Otherwise, all was still. It was as though the world itself held its breath, pausing to watch these quiet pilgrims move through the wilderness. Margaret walked ahead with her mother, her bonnet dusted white, her gaze fixed on the valley below. At one point, the boy saw her pause, her eyes distant, as if she were measuring the mountains against the memory of her father. He did not approach. Some burdens asked only for silent respect, but he kept her figure in his sight, steady as a star through drifting snow. By afternoon, the snowfall thickened again, stinging cheeks, clinging to lashes. The caravan slowed further. Children cried quietly, their sobs muffled by scarves. Elders leaned heavily on sticks, refusing to ask for rest. The boy felt his legs burn with fatigue, his breath ragged, but he pressed forward. Each step was a prayer in motion, one more, until the thought itself replaced weariness. At last, Bishop Yoda called a halt. "There is a lodge ahead," he said. "Abandoned, but it may shelter the women and children. The men will remain outside with the carts." Relief swept through the group, though it was subdued, worn thin by exhaustion. Shelter, even crude, was a promise of warmth. When the building appeared, a low, weathered structure pressed against a rocky slope, it seemed almost like a miracle. Its roof sagged under snow, but its stone hearth stood solid. Women moved quickly to sweep the floor, lay straw and coax flame from stubborn embers. The smell of pine needle tea soon mingled with smoke, sharp and comforting. Inside, children curled together like kittens, their cheeks pink with heat at last. Mothers hummed lullabies in the dialect of their ancestors, voices low and steady. The boy sat near the fire, his sister's wooden lamb in one hand, Margaret's cross in the other. One carved by his father, one gifted by hers. Both were small, both plain, yet each seemed to carry an anchor weight far greater than its size. Outside, his father kept watch with the other men, boots crunching in the snow. Their silhouettes shifted slowly beneath the moon, guardians against the darkness. Inside, the boy's eyelids grew heavy, the warmth lulling him toward rest. He thought of how snow had become both their enemy and their shield, both burden and blessing. Perhaps faith was the same, heavy to carry, yet the very thing that kept them safe. The last sound he heard before sleep was the sigh of wind settling against the walls, like a hand drawing the world into stillness. A valley opens, near to haven, yet not certain. The morning came brighter than any they had known in weeks. Sunlight spilled like molten gold across the wide sweep of snow, turning the valley below into a dazzling mirror of sky. From their perch among the trees, the families gazed downward, and for the first time in many weary days, they saw smoke rising from chimneys, thin and steady, the promise of hearths and human life. The valley of Emmental lay just beyond reach, yet the distance between sight and safety had never felt so heavy. The boy shifted his weight, feeling the ache in his legs from the climb. Around him, children stirred with quiet excitement, tugging at sleeves, whispering questions. Were they there? Could they rest? Would the authorities be waiting? Their voices never rose above hushed tones. Even joy learned to be cautious. Bishop Yoda raised a hand, his staff glinting in the snowlight. "We are near," he said simply, his voice carrying enough strength to reach the ears of all who waited. But remember, the last mile can hold the greatest dangers. The words settled over them like a cloak, neither a warning meant to frighten, nor comfort meant to soothe, but truth spoken with the weight of a shepherd guiding his flock. The descent began slowly. Careful steps pressed into the snow. The trees thinned, and the open fields of the valley stretched wide, dazzling and unbroken. The boy's breath caught as he noticed figures in the far distance, farmers tending to animals, children scattering feed for chickens, smoke curling lazily from cottages. Life went on here as though the world knew nothing of persecution, nothing of flight. Hans trudged beside him, cheeks red, eyes wide. "It looks so normal," he whispered, "like we could just walk in." The boy nodded, though his gaze stayed fixed on the road ahead, scanning for shadows, for movement that didn't belong. "Normal can be dangerous," he answered softly. "Sometimes danger wears an ordinary face." By midday, they reached a stand of pines overlooking a frozen stream. Here, Bishop Yoda called a halt, gathering the elders in a circle. The families rested, unpacking bread and dried apples, feeding children whose patience had worn thin. Even as they chewed, their eyes turned to the leaders, watching every gesture, every tilt of the bishop's head, as though the decision of when to move forward determined whether their breath would last another day. Brother Martin, the man they had hoped to meet, was waiting somewhere in the valley. But until he appeared, they were strangers in a land that might embrace or betray them. "We will wait until dusk," the bishop decided. "We must enter quietly, one family at a time. Together, we would be too visible." The words brought both relief and dread. Relief that a plan existed, dread that it meant separation. Already the children clung tighter to their mothers. Already friends exchanged glances heavy with the knowledge that once scattered, finding one another again would not be simple. Margaret stood a little apart, snow glinting on her bonnet. The boy moved to her side. She held something small in her gloved hand, a cross carved smooth with wear. "It was my father's," she said softly. "I want you to keep it until we see each other again." The boy took it, feeling the cool wood press into his palm. He remembered his father's words about treasures that could not be stolen, and he understood. This was not a gift of wood, but of faith carried across miles and years. "I'll keep it safe," he promised. As the sun dipped lower, shadows stretched long across the snow. The valley began to glow with that strange twilight light, blue and silver, soft yet sharp. It was then they saw the signal, 3 quick flashes of light from a distant ridge, then 2 more, a code known to those who had arranged their coming. Brother Martin had arrived. The caravan stirred. Horses were shifted into order, children bundled more tightly. One by one, families were assigned guides who emerged from the trees like phantoms. Men and women in plain clothing, their faces serious but kind, each stepping forward to lead strangers into hiding places scattered through the valley. The boy's family was called last. A tall man with a quiet voice introduced himself as Joseph. "My farm lies beyond the stream," he said. "Follow me and speak to no one on the road." The patrols have been thick of late. As they prepared to follow, the boy glanced back. Margaret's figure was already disappearing into the dusk, her hand held by her mother, her face turned once in fleeting farewell. He raised the cross in silent acknowledgement, tucking it into his coat before turning to the road ahead. The journey into the valley was heavier with silence than any they had known. Even the children seemed to understand that a careless sound might unravel all. Houses loomed in the distance, their windows glowing with firelight. Dogs barked faintly. The boys' heart beat in time with the crunch of snow beneath their feet. At one point, they heard horses, the unmistakable sound of hooves striking frozen ground. Joseph raised his hand, and the family pressed into the shadow of a hedge, hearts racing as lanterns swung past on the road. Authorities searching. The light passed, leaving them unseen. The boy exhaled slowly, his chest tight with relief. At last, Joseph pointed toward a modest homestead nestled at the valley's edge. "Here," he whispered. "This will be your shelter." Smoke rose from its chimney, faint but steady, a promise of warmth inside. When they stepped across the threshold, a woman greeted them with quiet urgency. "Come in quickly," she urged, ushering children through the door. Her eyes softened as she took in their weary faces. "You are safe here." Safe. The word was not absolute, not permanent, but for now it was enough. That night, the boy lay on a straw mattress, softer than any ground he had known in weeks. His siblings' breaths steadied into sleep beside him. He held the wooden cross in one hand, the carved lamb in the other. 2 tokens, 2 reminders, 1 faith. Beyond the window, the valley lay silvered under moonlight, so close to haven, yet not quite free. They rested in the fragile space between danger and peace. Gentle doors open, soup steaming, beds waiting in quiet. The farmhouse door closed with a soft thud against the night, muting the winds that still swept across the valley. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of broth simmered low and steady, a fragrance that felt almost miraculous after weeks of dried meat and bread hard as stone. The woman of the house moved with practiced calm, ladling soup into bowls as though she had been expecting them all along. No words of pity, no grand gestures, just the simple kindness of nourishment placed in tired hands. The boy sat with his siblings at a long wooden table worn smooth by decades of meals. His mother's shoulders eased for the first time in memory, her hands unclenching as she guided the little ones to eat. His father bowed his head, lips moving in silent thanks, not only for food, but for survival. Every spoonful of soup, every crumb of bread was more than sustenance. It was proof that strangers could be kin, that mercy still flickered in a harsh world. When the bowls were emptied and the children's eyes grew heavy, their hostess guided them to a small guest house just beyond the barn. Straw mattresses, layered blankets, pillows that smelled faintly of goose down, all waiting as if prepared for this very night. The younger ones tumbled into bed, sighing with the relief that only sleep can bring. The boy lingered, running his hands across the quilt stitching, each knot a reminder of hands unseen, of labor done for others. Hans sat beside him, voice hushed but curious. "Do you think this is home now?" The boy considered, the wooden cross Margaret had given him still tucked safe in his pocket. "It is for tonight," he said gently. "Tomorrow, perhaps somewhere else. But wherever we are, if we remain together, that is enough." Through the small window, moonlight silvered the valley, painting fields and rooftops in hues of peace. For the first time since they left the old farm, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, not as a fugitive running from shadows, but as a soul at rest, if only for a night. In the main house, his father spoke quietly with Joseph. Plans must be made. How long to stay, when it might be safe to gather with other families, how to rebuild something resembling a community. Each answer carried uncertainty, but woven through the uncertainty was determination, a steady acceptance that life would continue, shaped by faith and guided by patience. Later, as embers glowed low in the hearth, the boy found himself outside once more, snow crunching beneath his boots. The sky stretched vast above him, a canvas of stars so dense they seemed close enough to touch. He thought of the journeys yet to come, the whispers of America, far across the ocean, where land might be tilled without fear of midnight arrests. He could not know if he would see that shore, but he knew others would. Behind him, the farmhouse lights dimmed, windows darkening one by one as the family inside sank into sleep. The valley lay hushed, holding both peril and promise. Tomorrow might bring discovery, or it might bring a fresh beginning. Either way, the rhythm of faith would endure. Work at dawn, prayers at meals, songs rising softly even in exile. He closed his eyes, letting the night air press cool against his face. The carved lamb rested in his palm, its wooden curves warmed by his grasp. The cross lay close to his heart. Symbols, yes, but more than symbols, anchors in a drifting world. Home, he whispered to the silent fields, is carried within us. The words faded into the snow, absorbed by the earth, yet he felt lighter for having spoken them. Above, a shooting star traced its quiet arc, a fleeting reminder that movement across the heavens had always guided wanderers, that light had always pierced darkness. He returned to the guest house, slipping beneath the blankets beside his brothers. Their breathing was steady, their dreams untroubled for once. The boy's own eyes drifted closed, not with fear of what lay beyond dawn, but with trust in the quiet mercies that had carried them this far. Tomorrow, the journey would continue. Tomorrow, choices would be made. But tonight, there was rest, and in rest, there was strength. Tonight's world glows brighter than their darkest winters. The candlelight of the 17th century has long been replaced by a quiet hum of electricity. Where once a family shivered in barns and barns alone, today our nights are softened by central heating that comes on without our notice, radiators ticking quietly, vents carrying warmth through unseen ducts. The memory of breaking ice at a wooden bucket for a splash of morning water belongs to the past. In our kitchens, taps open with a twist, delivering clean water warmer than those mountain families could ever dream. Imagine the weary farmer of long ago, walking knee-deep in snow before dawn, searching for a lantern to guide his steps. Compare that to the simple glow that floods our hallways now, one flick of a switch turning midnight into morning. Where their hands bled from washing with lye, hours rest in warm soap suds, scented and healing. Bottles lined on shelves without ration. Food, too, has shifted beyond imagination. In that valley, survival was measured by whether the cow lived, whether a loaf of bread stretched through another week. For us, markets are lit late into evening, aisles stacked with fruit from distant lands, milk chilled in cartons that never sour before their date. We complain when the store runs out of a brand we prefer, while once families gave thanks for porridge unseasoned but hot. The rhythm of work has altered, though not vanished. Machines till the soil where hands once bled, gripping plow handles. A tractor's roar replaces the straining muscles of oxen. Yet, while efficiency has freed us from many burdens, a curious new weariness lingers. The constant pull of screens, the hurry of clocks, the soft but endless hum of obligations that press not on our bodies, but our minds. Perhaps that is why stories of long winters and quiet faith still soothe. They remind us that hardship is not new, though its shape has changed. Where wolves once threatened at night, we now fear deadlines, debts, or the glow of headlines scrolling endlessly. The shadows are different, but the heart recognizes the weight all the same. Their trials fade, but their wisdom lingers with us still. It is easy, in our time, to believe life is always complex. Phones chime in our pockets, roads hum with cars, and calendars fill faster than any barn could ever be raised. And yet, those who bent beneath winter winds centuries ago would look upon us with wonder, and perhaps with a kind smile. For while their burdens were survival itself, bread, shelter, safety, ours are more subtle, woven of choice and excess. They fled with Bibles hidden in vests, papers folded against their hearts. We too carry burdens unseen, but ours are measured in passwords, messages, the weight of information too great to hold in memory. Where they guarded every loaf, we discard food without notice. Where they walked until their legs failed, we sit until our spirits grow restless. Ease has come, but with it a quieter struggle. How to live meaningfully when survival no longer defines us. Yet in the hush of evening, with lights dimmed and the world slowed, their lessons rise again. That home is not walls, but the people who breathe beside us. That faith, whatever name we give it, is a kind of steady lantern, guiding not only through snow but through the confusion of modern noise. That work, though changed in shape, still binds us to the rhythm of days, sowing, tending, building, resting. As you listen, perhaps you can feel the echo of their songs, hymns hummed low in barns, prayers whispered as wagons creaked through valleys. Those melodies stretched across oceans and centuries, and even now they steady restless hearts. We need not share their dangers to draw on their calm. We need only pause, breathe, and notice the small treasures scattered in our own days. A warm mug, the presence of family, a lamp glowing steadily against the dark. And so, when you close your eyes tonight, know that the world has indeed changed beyond recognition, but the deepest truths have not. We remain creatures of hope, of family, of quiet longing for safety and belonging. Their barns have given way to our living rooms, their straw mattresses to our layered quilts. Yet the comfort of stillness, of trust that tomorrow will bring what it may, remains the same. The centuries fold gently, carrying hardship into memory and leaving wisdom behind. Let that wisdom settle over you like a quilt, warm and steady. Rest now in safety, in plenty, in peace. Sleep well, and let tomorrow wait.